Thank you for watching Fireside. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider liking and subscribing to be notified when future episodes release. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fireside. Today, I have a guest from beyond the figurative pond from a sister game. Some may call him the Bodhi of RuneScape 3. He's known for his stature as well as his streaming, his videos from series to guides, as well as his experience working as a JMod, a true renaissance man of this content creation space. Welcome, Mr. TheRSGuy, to Fireside.
Thanks for having me. That was a good intro. I think that's one of the best ones I've ever had, I think.
That's become like a little bit of a habit on Fireside. We always give our guests some great introductions, something nice and spicy because I feel like it's worth it. You guys are giving me the time to have a great conversation with super talented people. So why not give you guys the honors of a great introduction?
For sure. You had some hot takes in there. I like that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I've been obviously aware of your content for a while, as most people have, and obviously even more so after playing a lot of RuneScape 3 leagues. So it was very interesting to kind of see the conversation unraveling there, and now I'm kind of following both games, which has been very exciting for me.
Yeah, that's always been fun. That was my favorite thing about leagues was just like seeing how full the world was and how many old school people kind of came over, gave it a try, dabbled in. Even though like I did not like the league itself, I had like a million things that I wasn't happy with. Like just the fact that people actually tried it, gave it a shot was really cool, and I got to connect with so many people, such as yourself. And now I'm here, so it's kind of a fun way that it really connected us all between the two games.
Exactly, and we will get into that 100%. But before we do, I want to ask a very important question. Okay, one that has been on top of my head for ever since I heard of you. It's very important. How does it
All
feel?
right.
Okay. Let's get ready for this one. It's a super hot one. Okay. How does it feel to have such an amazing IP named after you?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, it feels good, but I also figure that considering I made the evolution of combat as a 15-year-old, it's kind of like it's expected that the game would be named after me at this point. But yeah,
Mm.
no, I definitely feel good about it for sure.
The evolution of combat being made by a 15-year-old, at least on release, kind of might check out a little bit for me.
I was
But
gonna say, that's the one thing about it that actually does make sense is like, yeah, honestly, probably.
awesome. That's honestly, now I know, and I think all of our viewers are very grateful for that insight too. Something I also want to bring up on a more serious side is you were a guest on the Save podcast. That's actually one of the first times I really heard like a lot of like you speak for a while, and I loved your guest appearance on that show. So what I don't want to do is retread a lot of those topics, your past, and if anyone's interested in that, if anyone is interested in hearing about the TheRSGuy's past, his history with both old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3, check out the Save cast. It's super, super great. Awesome episode. Like genuinely incredible. Some of the stories are just awesome there. So I don't want to retread a lot of those topics. And this show does have a tendency to dip into some of the most like specific nitty gritty like game design stuff. So I'm sure we'll dip into that with RuneScape 3 and old school RuneScape as well, if that's okay.
Oh, that's absolutely perfect. Usually, like the last couple things that I've been on, it's been very like this isn't for people that play video games. Like, make sure you're as general as humanly possible. So this is going to be like the complete opposite. That's perfect.
Exactly. Like I just had a 4-hour episode with one of the developers of OSRS, Mod Rice, and we were going really deep into it. He was throwing out words like qualia, which is like a philosophical term, and I'm just like, yeah, this is exactly what I love to hear when it comes to these kinds of long form podcasts. Anyway, RuneScape 3 year in review. Let's just I want to hear your thoughts on the year as a whole, the positives, the negatives. It's been a really, really big year for RuneScape 3, something that kind of sets it on a new path. Can you kind of guide us down that a little bit?
Yeah, your timing on this question is good because I'm working on like a year in review and I have a list of all of the updates from the year in order. So I'm cheating a little bit here. But yeah, I think this is kind of like I'm not going to say this is the biggest year in RS3 history because it's not. I think next year will be, because early next year you've got like microtransactions are being deleted and all this other stuff. They're basically spending the entire year just making the game better. And honestly, to me, it kind of seems like mimicking the pathway that old school took a little bit, where no one really is left behind in old school. And every component of the journey is good and is fun. Whereas in RS3, for a lot of players, the grind is terrible and the game isn't fun and the game doesn't flow well, but it's worth putting yourself through that negative experience in order to like get to the end game, and then you can start having fun. Whereas as an RS3 player, when I look at old school, it feels like there's content for all levels, all the way up your progression. So the actual journey itself is fun. So my ultimate hope actually is that that aspect of old school, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of taken over into RS3 and is something that we're going to have a lot more of, because I think it would just make the game so much better if you could just log in and play and have a good time regardless of what your stats were or how endgame your account was. So to me, this is like the year of setting the table for that. So we finally got like the MTX quote unquote poll, which wasn't really a poll as many people have brought up, but we've got, the removal of MTX. And even in the last 6 months, there's been a lot of like QOL that's come out, and it makes it pretty clear like what the plan is for next year and what it's going to look like. We've had a lot of areas that have been like cleaned up. We've had like defunct mini games kind of removed or moved elsewhere, moved off the overworld. Like it feels like it's going to be a year of like cleaning up and taking out a bunch of garbage from previous eras.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely what it feels like, as well as according to them, not slowing down their own like new content cadence too. And we'll get into the new content coming out next year as well. But that's a great kind of segue conversation there, and just like a what you brought up there is very interesting because I agree with you. At least from my experience with both games, obviously I have more so with OSRS. I view both of these games like in what they succeed in as kind of polar opposites, or at least different sides of the same coin, where I think old school RuneScape, especially in the past 2 years, has cleaned up its early and mid game to the point where it's just incredible. The early and mid game of old school RuneScape is just the best in the genre. I'm as someone who's played way too many MMOs in my life, and I obviously come from World of Warcraft. The early and mid game of old school RuneScape is just truly next level. The way skills interconnect, how many different paths there are to achieving singular goals is just so amazing. The end game of RuneScape, of old school RuneScape, something that I'm now deep exploring. I would say it's a bit more mixed for me, honestly. And I actually recently landed into super hot water for making a video kind of touching on this. So with a lot of the old school RuneScape players. It's a very interesting topic that I'm still wrangling my own mind around. But on the other hand, and not to ramble too long, RuneScape 3 to me has this huge pitfall of leaving, as you pointed out, the early and mid game behind. But when you punch through that end game, like at least that was my experience with leagues, there is something really cool and special there, especially with the kind of progression there is. And we'll touch deeper into that in a moment. But like the progression of RuneScape 3's end game is fascinating. The itemization is really interesting. The items are super impactful, while the OSRS end game flattens that curve because of how, I guess, limited the end game's power progression needs to be to retain value in existing end game content. That's a very esoteric way to put it, but essentially, it's very interesting to explore both of these games because of that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think a big part of it too is it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way. Like the thing that makes RS3's endgame so incredible and so fun to anyone that's been there or has had a chance to play it. It's the same kind of reason why there are a lot of pitfalls in RS3 as well, with like power progression and all this other stuff, because it leads to so many issues. But the endgame is impactful, it's fun. There are a ton of different bosses and a ton of content to play. It's almost like the letter T, where working your way up the T, there's nothing and there's only one path you can take. And then once you get to the end game and you're at the top, it evens out and the entire game opens out for you. And you can really like do whatever you want, play your own way, access a ton, and it opens up in a great way. But yeah, getting people there is so tough because yeah, like you said, early game and the mid game. Actually, I'd say especially the mid game more than like the first 20 hours early game. But the mid game players, in my opinion, completely and utterly left behind, and they have been for like a decade.
Yeah, I think something that was lost, at least in my experience with RS3, because leagues didn't really change this all too much, from my knowledge anyway, is all the utilities and upgrades you can get in old school RuneScape that make a more interesting and like dynamic progression path that's horizontal, right? In a lot of RS3's early and mid game, it's very vertical in like, you're okay, you're upgrading your armor, you're upgrading weapons, you're getting better abilities, but a lot of that, like, in old school RuneScape, you log in and you're level 3. You are walking everywhere. It is slow as molasses. You hate your life. You don't know if you even like this game. It takes 30 minutes to get from one area to another. And then you start upgrading, your magic spells. You level up your magic, and now you have teleports. But law runes are very hard to come by, so you do Guardians of the Rift. You unlock Fairy Rings, and now those are your new source of transportation. You get the Artie Cape that teleports you to the monastery, and you're a Fairy Ring. You can regenerate your. So you get this super crazy cross pollination, like a capillaries coming out of a vein, and it's becomes so much more interesting than just like going from a adamant scimitar to a rune scimitar. And a lot of RuneScape 3 is so dense and compact, and because you have the lodestone network, a lot of that like transportation uh progression, I guess, it doesn't feel as impactful. So all you're left with is just the very like linear, as you pointed out, progression up in the early and mid game. And that, as you also mentioned, in the end game becomes way more interesting because the items in the end game become more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to put it. I think, it goes even beyond the lodestone system. I think a lot of RSU players will tell you, or maybe they won't tell you, but the world feels empty. And people don't want to say that to like an old school audience because we're gonna get comments of dead game, Omega lol or whatever. But the truth is the world feels empty, but it's not because people aren't playing the game. It's because everyone is gonna be in the 4 or 5 places that people actually play. And you're never gonna see someone running between Lumberge and Varrock. You're never going to see, anybody kind of traversing the world anywhere. There are banks absolutely everywhere. And in a way, I mean, I don't want to say the player base has gotten spoiled over recent years, but it feels like as a band-aid to like players want accessibility, players want QL, new areas need to be better than the old areas. What ends up happening is there's just a best spot to do everything. You'd never see somebody like training fletching at a random bank because there's a specific bank in the game that gives you boosts to fletching. So you want to fletch there specifically. And because of that, yeah, not only is the progression very linear, but you also have a world that feels kind of empty a lot of the time, especially for a new player. And that was one of the things that blew me away, not to get back to leagues and we can jump back out, but on day one of leagues, seeing Lumbridge full of players running around, like that was probably the best moment of leagues for me. I haven't seen that in 10 years on RS3 of just noobs running around. And I think when we talk about the future of the game and moving into next year and getting rid of MTX and trying to attract new players, it's one of the problems that kind of needs to be solved because even if you get rid of a lot of the garbage in the game and a lot of the stuff that, people don't like or has kept people away, I think, and this is like a concern that we can elaborate on a little later and I'll raise further on, but I feel like if you're a new player and you log in and the world feels empty, you're not going to stick around. So it's a bit of a problem to solve, perhaps.
Yeah, when I said like the two games are opposite sides of the same coin, old school RuneScape undeniably has the, easier to market side, I should say, because when you have a good early and mid game, it's so much easier for players to get invested in your game, right? Like the classic MMO meme of like, oh, it gets better after X amount of hours, really is a challenging sell, especially for a game that you might log in and it does feel empty. So you're like, oh man, how much do I have to wait until I see the part that people are constantly, praising? And I think the thing that I love that old school RuneScape did that I hope RS3 does, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm starting to see a little bit of it, is shifting down some of the most exciting elements of old school RuneScape a bit earlier into someone's progression. What do I mean by that? Things like, have you heard of the scurriest boss in old school RuneScape? It's a big rat.
I have, yes.
Yeah, that was released j- um the same month that I started playing RuneScape. That's when Scurrius was released. So I'm very much like fond of him. I think it's a great fight, and it's made for like level 60s. Really, really early on. It's like probably the earliest game boss possible. But it teaches you how to switch prayers, teaches you how to avoid stuff on the ground, teaches you how to like switch to different targets, and it has some really cool mechanics in this regard too. Yes, and you just sent this to me, and this is exactly why I brought it up, because now I'm seeing RuneScape 3 do the exact same thing by adding not even going to try to pronounce this guy's name, but a boss in the really early game as well that is very much teaching players how to do certain things, and it's adding the coolest parts of RuneScape 3's endgame, like for example, some of these telegraph systems that they added to help see mechanics on the ground to early games, so people really early on can go, oh, there is something to look forward to that's not 1,000 hours in the future.
Yeah, exactly that. I'll try to pronounce it, but we just got a boss that I mean, I wouldn't really call it a Scurious equivalent, but it's called Flesh Hatcher Macarnaz, and it's a boss that's like 40 dungeoneering, 50 or 60 stats. It's got an XP modifier, so kind of like the opposite of the crab on old school, where you actually get positive 50% XP there. And the way that XP works, it's the same as old school, where it's based on the damage you deal. So if you're training there as a mid-level player, you're going to get kind of more bang for your buck in terms of the damage you're dealing. It's very squishy. It's got a lot of HP. It looks really sick. It's got telegraphing. And yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that is missing from RS3. And I'm glad to see it happening. And I'm hoping as we come into next year's content, there are opportunities to add 5, 6, 7 more bosses that kind of fill all of these mid-level niches. And kind of work their way down. Because if you're an existing RS3 player, a lot of the time, like people will be like level 100 combat, or they'll be coming from old school. I'll get a message like, okay, so what PVM can I do? And it's like, well, you could do the King Black Dragon, and you could do the Giant Mole, which is going to make you want to rip your hair out. And those are the 2 bosses you have. And it really just is like a T shape, like the letter T. Like there's nothing until you get to the end game. And then all of a sudden you've got 40 bosses that are all kind of similar difficulty level to each other. It's a mess. But yeah, no, that's definitely, it's a good direction. It's one that I'm personally really happy for. But it's also fun seeing discourse on it, because a lot of RS3 players who are in the end game aren't used to updates not being for them. And I'm sure that comes up a lot in old school, but something like this, like, oh, what's the point of this? It's so low level. Oh, the drops are useless. Nobody wants a dragon harpoon, which is, by the way, I think it's literally a 1-to-1 of the old school one. And yeah, I think sometimes RuneScape's player base, because it's so specific and it's so many people who've like, I'd say the average RS3 player has probably been there for 8 years. Like it really is this kind of very old, very experienced player base. Like sometimes they get in their own way, and they get in the way of kind of seeing the big picture and helping the game move forward.
Yeah, that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up, because getting in your own way from a player-based perspective is very easy to do. It's not something I necessarily blame the players on. It's honestly, and I say this with a lot of love to the developers of these games, including RS3, but like it's the developers and the directors and everyone who creates this game is who curates the audience of the game, right? If you create an audience of people expecting immediate results, crazy experience gains, and you give that to them via microtransactions for a decade, taking that away is always going to feel kind of weird, even if you kind of agree with it. Like a great example of this in old school is the blowpipe nerf that occurred years ago that I always read about. Is the blowpipe came out with Zulrah. It was categorically busted, like just insane. It was so good, it was better than the mega rare from the first raid, the Chambers of Zarek, on like so many different encounters. It's just insane, and it was so easy to obtain, relatively speaking. And it was so broken that Jagex could not add range strength bonus items to the game because of the way the blowpipe scaled with them. So they had to nerf the blowpipe like pretty hard, like 50% nerf, just cut it in half essentially. And there was a not insubstantial number of people being like, "This sucks. Like I can't do this content anymore because I'm so used to the output of the original blowpipe. Now this kind of sucks. It's devalued my item." But like objectively speaking, it is 1,000,000% good for the game. And that's the kind of change and the kind of friction now that that RuneScape 3 needs to engage its audience with, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about like instant gratification and a lot of like massive XP. RuneScape 3's existing player base, the people we have left, are used to taking shortcuts on everything. Like the best way to train Herblore, the best way to train agility. It isn't Herblore or agility. It's doing your weekly penguins and then getting 600k XP and lamps every week. Like there's stuff like that across the entire game. There's the Wilderness Flash events, the D&Ds, there's the Treasure Hunter and the MTX. And as a result of like, I mean, you said it, but like the devs and the designers, those are the people and the people that make the game are the people that have now curated the audience. But the risk here is they've curated an audience that actually, a lot of the time, if you look in the comments of a lot of the recent kind of social media posts, everything else, I was expecting everybody to be celebrating the end of Treasure Hunter. Nope. It is a ton of negative people all across every social media getting very angry because their gambling is being taken away because they're so used to it. And people have used the term survivorship bias. I think that's part of it too, is obviously if you pull existing players that haven't left the game, they're going to be more tolerant to MTX than, if you pulled people that have left the game or been driven away from it. But it's really, I think it's going to be a huge point of friction on, I think it's January 19th of 2026 when Treasure Hunter goes away. I think RuneScape's taking a huge risk here because the player base that RS3 has is not a player base that for some of the player base anyway actually wants to play a game. They just want to see their number go up in whatever means necessary. So yeah, I think what they're doing is important. I think old school RuneScapeifying it a little bit, if I could use that term, is good. But yeah, I think a lot of RS3 players are a little on edge heading into the new year because if this doesn't bring new players, a lot of people are going to quit as a result of like all of these changes. And I'm personally one that like, I'm kind of like, okay, good riddance. If you're not playing the game for the game, you can go play something else. Like maybe that feels a little harsh, but that's kind of how I feel about it. But I think you really, in this instance, like you need to break some eggs to make an omelet. And I think the plan only works if the community can change and the community needs to move forward and move back to what it used to be, which is people who want to play the game for the game.
That's always something I've maintained where like if you've spent a lot of time curating an audience for of people that don't necessarily want to play MMOs, then you're never going to be able to create a great MMO. You might make a great idle game or I don't know, gambling simulator, but you're not going to create a great MMO ever. And I think there's a lot of MMOs that are dealing with this right now for a whole, not just from MTX, just in systems design, whatever it is. But it's always important to take a step back and get an audience of people that are there for what the intent of the game is rather than from what it became thanks to X, Y, and Z situation. And that's the difficulty, right? And I said this in, I believe, one of my videos about this topic where I was like, I'm very excited for these changes, but people need to understand that removing the microtransactions, this does not cure the game. This is just, it's essentially like amputating a limb right now, and the limb has been infected for a long time. So this is a very gross example, but the limb has been infected for a long time. You're amputating it, but now you gotta make sure you don't bleed out, right? You have to make sure that you survive the actual amputation. You got to make sure it doesn't hurt too much. You got to make sure that you get a good prosthetic after that. Like that, this is just the start of the journey. And just removing MTX does not cure the game, or at least removing it in its current manifestation does not cure the game. It just sets it on a better path. And now you have to spend the next year or two figuring out what that new path you got set on even looks like, and how to retain and get new players in. That's the most important part. Market it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can talk about different ways that they could get new players in a little later on. I think it's somewhere in the topic list if I'm reading
Oh,
ahead.
definitely.
But I think no, it's a good way to put it. And I've been saying that I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I'm so overjoyed that RuneScape is finally, I would say, treating itself with respect, and taking a big swing and taking a big risk. And like I think the end result, like to me, RuneScape 3, I'm not going to be a doomer and be like, oh, the game's dying. Cause like in reality, like the numbers have been pretty steady. But to me, especially even if you look at things like the microtransactions revenue year over year, if that's actually the monetization model, you're looking at a game that is slowly, the well is drying up. And this existing model isn't going to work. So the options are you could keep doing this until the game completely dies, and do even more damage than you already have. And you can keep scope creeping in and you can make even more overpowered treasure hunter promotions and do that until, there's no game left. And the only people who are left are people who are playing it to make the number go up or playing it as an idle game or just straight up quote unquote gambling if you want to. Or you could do this. Like to me, there are two simple paths or two clear paths. And this is definitely the more bold, the more brave path. And it's one that I mean, beyond anything else, like I really believe in it. And I think a lot of the people that are putting it together, because I've had a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, they're the kind of people that I would like run through a wall for. And I believe in the vision. I believe in the idea. And like, we won't know if it's going to work or not until it happens. But I think the right people are in the right spot to actually execute this and do it correctly.
Definitely. And so on the very same topic of improving the game and just like setting it on the right path, so first of all, after my original essay on like leagues and RuneScape 3 and my general perspective on the game, very lucky to have spoken to a couple of the developers of the game. Shout out to Mod Ramen and Mod Sponge, who have really been behind the scenes of RuneScape 3 for a while now and are really great to speak to about the game, and they helped elucidate some of my questions and just give me like essentially like a better understanding of what I'm talking about. And the reason I bring that up is because there's the MTX side of things, but that's not the only problem, right? To me, the bigger issue of RuneScape 3, right, is more fundamental, right? MTX is nice because you can just kind of switch it off and see where the game's at. Hopefully, the economy starts to recover. Hopefully, people get more accustomed to the new experience rates, and you can adjust things here and there depending on that. But like the biggest thing, and this is likely because it's something I actually interacted with during leagues, is the dailies and the weeklies and the monthlies and the hourlies. That to me was just such a, I guess it was just, I was both expecting and not expecting how many there are and how efficient they are to do. And not to ramble too long, but I want to just highlight for the people that are maybe curious why I even care about these, because the constant argument against them, or for them, I guess, is, well, just don't do them. Who cares? A RuneScape as an IP and as a sandbox, or a curated sandbox MMO, as I call it, is one that is reliant on you creating your path and feeling confident in that path and finding your own unique solutions to get somewhere. But simultaneously, it's very grindy. And being optimal, being efficient, managing your time and your resources is part of that satisfaction. And when all of those answers is just doing dailies and doing the same daily thing over and over again, that limits the amount of paths and it makes you feel bad for actively pursuing something different. And it's FOMO, right? Naturally. So that to me was such a big problem, and I'm glad that they brought that up in that video they released a month or so ago about the future of the game, that they're going to address dailies. Can you give me your thoughts on them? Although I suspect I know what you'll say.
Yeah, I actually, on the other side of the coin, I love everything about dailies.
Oh,
No, I'm
great,
kidding.
awesome.
That was a joke. So here, I mean, absolutely, they're one of the 4 or 5 like major headline issues with RuneScape 3. And honestly, I would put MTX up there with dailies as equally impactful, but for kind of different reasons. Not because like gambling bad or because paid progression bad necessarily, but just because of the reputation impact on the game. I think a lot of people avoid recommending the game to friends. As a streamer, as a creator, I don't recommend this game to my friends because there's an 8% chance they end up ruthlessly addicted to Treasure Hunter, and like that just feels bad. Like I don't want to recommend a game to people that has the potential to like genuinely cause harm to their well-being. um Although maybe that's what MMOs are. But moving back to dailies, yeah, I despise them. It's too much. For context, for the old school people who are watching, maybe don't know a lot about the game, an efficient daily path, and RSA has dailies, weeklies, monthlies, and hourlies. So we have hourlies that are on the hour every hour. Efficiently, if you're playing like an Iron Man, you could do upwards of 3 hours per day of just dailies. Like a lot of people will log in and spend the whole morning doing all their dailies, and then they'll start playing the game in the afternoon, which is not the most employed behavior, but that is how to play efficiently. And yeah, no, it's a huge problem. And my big issue with it, and you touched on this too, is like efficiency is important, but also it's shortcuts. It's instant gratification. Like there are literal skills in RuneScape 3 that you would never train because you're going to passively get them all the way to 99 just by doing dailies and hourlies that are super overpowered for, for money or for XP or for other kind of forms of progression. So like you would never train fire making, you would never train woodcutting because there's just a wilderness flash event that does them for you. Whatever your lowest combat stat is, you wouldn't bother training it because you're going to lamp it all the way to 99. Same with Slayer. You can lamp that to 99 just by doing the dailies that you're already going to do. I think there are a few that are a lot worse than others. Like I've mentioned it, but Wilderness Flash events are absolutely the single worst daily. They're super overpowered. They completely ruin early game progression. They give you a ton of money, a ton of XP, and they're every hour, and there's no cap on how many you can do. And to me, like all of these things, they're just cheap tricks to get people to play or to feel bad for not playing. I remember when Sick Nerd came over to RS3. There is a story that when he first started, he was setting an alarm every 7 hours, even in the middle of the night, because he had to check his trapper, which is another kind of like hourly, who has animals for player-owned farms that are super rare. Because the alternative to getting a chinchompa from your trapper would be to hit a 1 in 5K from hunting chinchompas. So like it allows you to skip a huge grind if you're absolutely on it. And like, well, that's a funny story. It's like I think the game has way too many of those for every skill. And I'm of the opinion you could probably kill like 80% of all of the dailies and hourlies and weeklies and monthlies in the game, and the game would just straight up be better. Like you could just kill them immediately without replacing them with anything, and it would probably be fine.
Yeah, I actually completely echo that. I'm not sure if I said that in my video, but I definitely echo that. The core issue here to me um is that not only are dailies just in my opinion inherently bad for the genre, but they're also specifically especially bad for the kind of subgenre that RuneScape inhabits, right? It's a grindy sandboxy MMO where you just do a daily, you do a 5 minute wilderness flash event. Is that what? Yeah, flash world, the
Yep.
hourly wilderness events, right? Which I did over 100 during leagues. The how bad it feels to go back. You do the woodcutting one, you get in leagues it was like 500k, but like in the regular game even it would be like at least 50k XP, right? At a high level woodcutting. From that 5 minute event that you can genuinely just start AFKing at a certain point, and a lot of people do, and then you go back to just chopping normal trees and you're like, this sucks. And it creates this really weird dissonance between the actual part of the game that is there and intentional versus the part of the game that's just kind of like the FOMO hourly event. And it just makes the actual game feel worse. Just overall, it makes training in the actual game feel worse because you can just access that new thing. So you're like, okay, well, I might as well just wait to the next one, because why am I even wasting my time with this when the next one is going to get me where I want to go anyway? And I don't have to spend 6 hours, getting, or 2 hours getting the kind of experience rates I can get in 2 minutes otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, another way to put that would be like it incentivizes not playing the game.
Yeah, definitely. And I really hope that, as you said, 80% can be cut. My idea of it, and I know I didn't bring this up earlier, uh, is do what you did with the MTX. Just disable all of them for like a month, and then use that as like a point of data to figure out, or maybe a couple weeks, and use that as like data to, okay, well, what parts of the game are now suffering the most, and then figure out a way to integrate them in a not daily way, or figure out a way to buoy up those parts of the game. A great example of this is divination, a skill that I don't know if anyone actually trains normally. It's just like done through the hourly cash system. You can do them twice a day and they give insane amount of rewards, and the activity itself is not inherently bad, although there's some issues with it. And I'm just always wondering, like, why can't they just make that into an actual training method? Why does it need to be an hourly? Why not just like, and maybe with a slight rework that incentivizes people to be on the same world. Right now, you have to like find the empty world to do it optimally. But with a slight like change here and there to make it more fun to do with other people, it could just be a thing that is open that you go and do with a bunch of people. Now you're training around like 100 other people in this small area. That alone is kind of fun to look at, and it's a way to split up the the actual divination, which is definitely a skill of all time for sure.
I have been saying that for like 3 years, by the way. Like
Okay, great.
literally word for word is I want them to make caches into a level 30 to level 70, just an actual training method, like a permanent, you go there and you train in caches training method. Do some QOL, make some things work a little bit better, make it so there's less in between people friction. But yeah, why can't it just be a training method? A place that you go at a certain level that, you can have it fill the same level bracket, because Divi gets a lot better once you're after level 70. But before that, yeah, it's an absolute slogfest. But yeah, no, right on board with you completely.
And it already has a good reward, right? The divination outfit. So it's not like you need to make up new rewards for it. Like you already get something pretty good from it. So it's like it's there. Now you just have to not FOMO, like, don't FOMO it up, just kind of make it a little bit uh, more not horrible. And the same applies to a lot of the dailies, quite frankly. Like I don't understand why things like the sandstone mining, if people aren't aware, there's this mining method that you do daily. There's two of them actually. They work the same way, but they just give different things. One of them is in Prifddinas. One of them is outside the Ogre area in RuneScape 3, which doesn't exist in old school, where Uglog, I think, or something.
Yep, that's the
And
one.
and you mine there this crystal flecked sandstone that you turn into crystal flasks and ogre flasks or something, which are like just the larger version of potion flasks, or potion vials. It's still kind of early. The point is that you do them for better herblore stuff, and you can only mine 50 of them a day, and it's just like it's so unnecessary. That to me is just, is there an economy around people doing that? Is that the only reason why it's like that? To me, that's just so frustrating because now I'm gated by how much of these potions I can make. So now I have to log in once every month, or sorry, once every day for a whole month to get enough of a stack of potions to do X, Y, and Z content with, and it just creates this really obnoxious kind of like, yeah, I guess I have to stop doing what I want to do and go do that. And this is the most insane. This, I did not experience this in leagues, thank God. But when I heard about this, I'm like, okay, until they fix this, I'm not doing an Iron Man. Is the fact that shops, the way shops work in RuneScape 3 is on a daily system as well. Whereas in, so rune runs in old school RuneScape are, you go to a shop and you hop worlds. It's not fun. It's stupid. I hate it. But at least it's, you can get like a stack of 50,000 runes within like an hour, if not less. But in RuneScape 3, you're limited to the amount of runes you can get per day. So you have to do like just days and days, if not weeks, of rune runs just to facilitate the magic skill. And that's my favorite skill in RuneScape 3. So it's like, damn, I want to do that, but I also don't want to, do that too.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a lot here with dailies. Pretty well spot on. Like, yeah, there is absolutely no reason that flasks needed to be a daily, except that it's an economy thing. Which I always find is a terrible rationale for just making content bad. The amount of people that have FOMO about like, what if I run out of flasks and I can't PVM? So then they feel pressured to do it every day. And then you see these screenshots where it's like, oh, it's an Iron Man that's done it for 800 days in a row. And they have this just mega stack of flasks. And it's like, I don't know. It just, none of it needs to exist. And yeah, the same with the shop runs. I've got a maxed hardcore Iron Man, and I think I've got over 1 million of all of the like elemental runes on that account. And to an old school player, that's like, okay, so you hopped for a couple hours. But for me, it means you can only buy, the shop stock is 1,000 per day per shop. There are 4 shops. So it means I did 250 days of rune shop runs visiting the 4 shops in the game. So it's just, it's so needlessly annoying. And I think especially when you're looking at making RuneScape 3 kind of more appealing, and this is, I don't know if this is a hot take. I don't think it is. I think realistically, the best way for RuneScape 3 to grow its player base is to appeal to old school players. Because a lot of old school players will pick it up as a side game or a side MMO and then be able to kind of go back and forth between game updates and play both games. And I think it's the neatest, cleanest, clearest jump between MMOs. Like OSRS and RS3, it's not as big as a jump of a lot of people think. There's a lot of similarity. And to me, there are just like some friction points with dailies that you need to get rid of in order to kind of enable that and open up the pathway to that.
Exactly. I mean, listen, I have a dream. I don't know. I just MLK'd it there. That's my bad. The point is, what I want, okay? What I really want between both games, as you pointed out, is this cross pollination where, okay, maybe there's a content lull in OSRS. People can hop over to RS3 and explore the new stuff, and vice versa. That's like the ideal scenario. And I do think there's enough similarities between the games, but enough differences to actually make the experience fun. It's not like you're making a second account in OSRS when you're doing RS3. They're still different enough where you're getting a holistically unique experience. But because the early and mid game issues of RS3, it makes it so much harder to get invested. There's just a lot of bloat in RS3. Something I spoke to Micro about when I had him on this show is it feels like there's so much stuff in RS3 that is just not relevant or done or necessary. And sometimes bloat is worth reworking. Other times it's just worth removing. Like there's a lot of content to me, like just a lot of the mini games and stuff that no one plays. Maybe they have like one reward that's worth it. That to me, the game would just be better if they didn't exist and they could just recenter focus on the stuff that's good and worth keeping, and then revitalize some of the unique things. Because reworking everything is an untenable proposition, right? And to me, it just needs to be a little bit narrower in regard to how much stuff there is, but also that narrower direction is more like exciting in the early mid game. Like you're not doing bridge jumping for agility, for example.
Are you familiar with the term buffscape?
I'm imagining what it means, but I thought it would be something for endgame. But is it something not for endgame?
It's something always. So the way that RS3 works, and it ties really well into bloat, and that's kind of why I'm bringing it up. In old school RuneScape, if you want to train fletching or fire making, like
Mm,
to my understanding, I think you guys might have Ring of Fire and Flame Gloves. I don't even know.
we
You throw
don't.
those on and you start burning logs. You don't even. So you basically just
Mm,
start burning logs, right? You can just train.
mm. Wintertide, but
In
yeah,
RS3,
essentially, yeah.
in RS3, oh yeah, sorry. Okay, maybe I picked a bad skill. Herblore, you're making potions, you just make potions.
Exactly.
Whereas in RS3, you're doing this. You're activating your premier artifact. You're using an overhead emote to activate a boon that gives you extra XP. You're using Torstal Incense 6. You're going to the clan and setting up your clan avatar. You are getting your outfit. You need the 120 cape. You need the mask add-on for the outfit. You need a special piece of jewelry. So by the end, any skill you're training, you need 8 different pieces of specialized equipment, and you need 10 or 12 different buffs in order to train it optimally. And the end result is it feels absolutely, you've got to switch your archaeology relics, you need an aura. The end result is training in this game and actually playing it feels absolutely miserable because you get so much bloat. Like you can't even just like go train the skill and play the game. You have to think about all these buffs that you have to constantly juggle and activate and deactivate in order to like get good XP rates or not burn your food or whatever else. And my hot take in this, I mean, it's not even a hot take, I think. I think I'm in the right spot. Today's audience is the right audience for this one. I think you could literally remove all of that. And if there's anything you want to retain, maybe like from a skilling outfit, because in RS3, every skill has an outfit, just make it a leveling benefit. Like if you want people to be able to chop logs 10% faster or have a 2% chance of getting 2 logs at once, bake it into the skill. So at level 90, you unlock the ability to splinter logs or whatever it is. But yeah, no, I just think there's way too much, and all of it should be behind the scenes or deleted. Like a player should not, and maybe this goes against like fundamental MMO design too, but like I don't think you should be able to like turn on or have to turn on like a 10% XP buff for the next 60 minutes in order to like train a skill optimally. I don't like any of it. I think all of it just makes the game confusing and hard. And when you look at end game skilling in RS3, if you can, even imagine that exists, there are 30 buffs going on. It's sort of similar to watching endgame PVM actually, where it's very overwhelming to someone looking and it's like, oh, how do I train this skill? Oh, get this and this and this and this and this and this. And then you can finally start training.
Yeah, I think ideally to me, end game skilling just needs to be unique activities in the end game for skilling. Like it shouldn't be just you like fucking around the UI to activate a bunch of buffs or like whatever, or for it, or limit yourself to an hour of training because that's what the aura. The auras are a whole different thing. I really hope they remove them. I don't understand
Yep.
why they still exist. They're kind of bizarre. But if people don't know, there are these like auras in a specific slot on your RS3 character, and you activate them and they last between 30 minutes and an hour, usually, maybe sometimes a bit longer. And there's skilling benefits, there's combat benefits. In leagues, there are only the combat benefit ones. And yeah, I don't understand them. Like the way you obtain them in the main game is you have to like just be subscribed for a long time, so you're time gated out of getting a lot of them. And like on top of that, it just feels like a really weird thing to balance around. And on top of all of that, as you pointed out too, it's like they just limit how much you can do. There were times, even in leagues, where I have my aura popped and I can do the PVM and I feel like I'm doing it well. And then when my aura fades, I either have to reset it with currency or whatever, or I just have to wait. And I'm just like, well, I kind of want to keep going. I don't want to wait. I want to keep going. So yeah, that's the kind of definitely a bit of an issue they can. But that's a pretty easy one to solve. I feel right.
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah, auras, I'm in the same boat on. And this is also a controversial one because a lot of RSC players that are left, they like their auras because they're really overpowered, right? And it's the same thing where it's like a cheap trick to reward you for never canceling your subscription. That's really what auras are. To me, they are a form of MTX because of that. But yeah, absolutely. The idea that old school players, like when you want to go kill a boss or do a raid, you just kind of go until somebody has to leave. That is a crazy foreign concept to an RS3 player. Because in RS3, every single activity you do 1 hour at a time. You don't even establish that. That's just what it is because that's what your aura is. And during the last kill of everybody's aura, everybody says thanks for kills. And then the team either decides to do a second hour or they disband. Like it actually regiments the entire game. But PVM auras are resettable. Skilling auras are even worse because you can only reset one skilling aura once per day. And a lot of these skilling auras are exceptionally important. Like it's the single strongest boost to like a gathering skill or like fishing, woodcutting, like your chance to actually get a log. Like a top tier hatchet might boost you by like 8%. And then this aura that you can get whenever is like 15%.
Yeah, it's
So
just really
are
bizarre.
overpowered. They break the game, especially in the early game, where it's like you're trying to train pickpocketing. You get caught every 8 seconds, and then you throw on the legendary aura, and now you can AFK for 15 minutes at a time, and you have 0% chance of ever getting caught. Like it's they're overpowered. They kind of actively prevent you from playing the game in the way that you want to. Like for me anyway, like as a player, I want to get sucked into my adventure. If I'm making a new account and I want to train thieving so that I can go to heists so that I can get a weapon, I want to be able to train thieving. I don't want to have to train thieving for 1 hour and then force myself to do something else or log out until my aura is back. Like it is such an anti-game mechanic. And a lot of RSC players are used to them and won't like me saying this because they like the buffs and all this stuff. It's like if there's an aura buff that's actually good that you care about, make it a leveling benefit. Just make it a passive.
Yep.
And if it's not important enough to be a passive, delete it from the game. But yeah, no, I've been a huge advocate for literally removing the entire aura slot. I dislike everything about it. I dislike mostly the way that it impacts people's gameplay loops. And I think when I hear about old school and how people just kind of like do stuff, it makes me want to stop playing RS3 and play old school. Like unironically, almost more than anything else. That to me is the most like liberating feeling is like, wait, so you can just log in and do whatever you want? That's great. I want that.
That's exactly what I was like I guess motioning toward a bit earlier when I said like the subgenre of these games that they inhabit and how RuneScape 3 feels like it's lost some of that because of how restricted it feels when you're playing it. When being restricted is certainly not the defining feature of a sandbox or a curated sandbox MMO, right? Like the whole idea, and I think people say the two shining features of old school RuneScape and just RuneScape in general is the longevity of your progression. It's a long term game, and you get long term benefits from investing in that. And simultaneously to that is how you can take different paths and reach the same conclusions, right? The same outputs. Like, that's what's so satisfying to people. And I've certainly done that. I've certainly skipped some content I didn't like, even as an Iron Man, and focused on other content that I did like, and I didn't feel like I was being actively punished for that for the most part. So I definitely want to see that return, and I want to say that the developers are pretty aware of that. I don't imagine there are a lot of developers on RuneScape 3 right now going like, no, keep the auras. I love them. Like I don't think there's a lot of people like that. So I definitely see a more positive future there. And on that topic, you brought up thieving. You brought up. I want to shift a little bit to just more something more positive because there's a lot of issues with RS3, and thankfully they're being addressed. And I think these are really important conversations to have. But there's also elements of RuneScape 3 that I think work really well. And there's certainly elements of RuneScape 3 that old school RuneScape has already taken, but just renamed because a lot of old school RuneScape players get really upset when you just take an element of RuneScape 3 and they know it's from RuneScape 3. So you have to rename certain stuff just to make them less upset. The most recent example of this is something called a Surge Potion, which is just an adrenaline pot in RuneScape 3, but it got renamed and put into old school RuneScape because if there's a single person on the OSRS Reddit that's like, this is from RuneScape 3, I don't know if that would have passed the poll. I really don't. So it's kind of one of these things where there's clearly a lot of really cool stuff in RuneScape 3 too. And I want to touch on some of these as well. Obviously, you have experience in both games, but you haven't played old school RuneScape in a long time, at least not like very seriously. I know you were doing some crabbing as well when that came out, and the big one. And but there's some really cool stuff. And I don't want to keep rambling on about what I think that is, but can you touch on some of your favorite features of RuneScape 3 and maybe we can like have a conversation about those?
Yeah, for sure. I'll also say my old school experience is basically zero. I played the
Okay.
first year it came out from day one for 1 year. And then other than that, I've got 40 stats from the crab in the
Based.
big 2025, and that is literally it. So I honestly feel like a completely new player. So whenever I jump over to old school at some point and try it out, because I'm sure I will at some point for a couple months, see what happens, try to get a Zuck cape or whatever. Or do you guys call it a Zuck cape or an Inferno cape?
I think Inferno Cape is the more common term.
Okay, fair
We
enough.
have the it's funny, not to go on too much of a tangent, but we have the obviously we have the the Inferno, which RuneScape 3 has, and then RuneScape 3 adapted that into more of like a short form wave based thing that's a bit more exciting, in my humble opinion. I am not an Inferno fan. I'm sorry to say to people who are in old school RuneScape. I'm just not the kind of content I really enjoy. But then old school RuneScape came out and added something called the Colosseum, which is much more similar to the RS3 version of the Inferno than it is the old school version of the OSRS Inferno. So it's very interesting to see how all of these games kind of cross pollinate their influence. Sorry, that's kind of a tangent, but yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, there's a lot of crossover too. I think there's actually more than a lot of old school players maybe think and or know. And a lot of it comes from like devs speak to each other a lot. Obviously, we're friends, but also a lot of RS3 devs move over to old school and then move back and forth between both games. So I'll give you a good example there. One of my good buddies, Mod Shogun,
Mhm.
he is known for RS3. He's been working on RS3 for like a decade. And then all of a sudden, bam, sailing. And now there are a bunch of things from RS3 in sailing. And I'm like, I can see the influence. I can see how that happened. Because it's like, yeah, you've grabbed an RS3 dev who spent his whole, professional career on RS3, and now he's gonna spend a year and a half working on sailing. So anyway, all that to say, like, it happens a lot more than I think people realize, especially with RS3 devs and producers and things moving over to old school to kind of help with, release schedules and things like that. It happens a ton. But yeah, so we're talking about like things that are really good in RS3. Is that what you wanted me to
Yeah,
rattle
yeah.
off?
I kind of want to, yeah, just maybe some of the highlights of the game, and maybe we can try see if they adapt to old school, or if they have been adapted to old school, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'll try to avoid ones that have already been adapted because, like, we have a lot of bosses that old school has very close to copied, to be honest with you. But I think that's a bit of a more tired conversation. And then we can go the other way too, because I really want TOB in RuneScape 3. It works so well. But yeah, I mean, I think RS3, the three things that are the best about RS3, we've got exceptional quests when you get to the end game, when you get to the Grandmaster quests with unique boss fights, and like you really feel like the World Guardian who is playing through an adventure. And the story of RS3, fantastic. The second kind of big one to me is the endgame PVMing is just because you've got ability based combat, you can get, and I don't want to offend anybody by saying this, but this is, talking to people that have done like every combat achievement in both games, you can get a lot more complexity and depth in RuneScape 3 because of the ability based combat. And it's, it's a double edged sword because it's hard to watch and it's hard to understand what's going on. But you can make boss fights that are just so brutally difficult and challenging, and they're so satisfying to complete. And we've got that recently with a Masket. So we've got the hardest group boss we've ever had, and it scales in difficulty to levels that are just never before seen, absolutely cruel. And then the highest difficulty mode, all you get is cosmetics, and you get an achievement. It's like a Grandmaster achievement for completing it once. So it's kind of like single completion aspirational content that requires 5 people to be absolutely perfect for like 20, 25 minutes. So that's one that I think you could adapt to old school pretty nicely. And then the third one is just active skilling. Those would be like my three facets that I think RS3 actually does really well.
For sure. I think that, and I'm sure we'll get a bit deeper into the PVM in a moment. That's a whole separate, that's a big one. I love talking about that. When it comes to, yeah, I think both games, I mean, yeah, both games do quests for sure in a very, I mean, very unique way, right? No other MMO does quests like RuneScape, and RuneScape 3 certainly keeps that trend going. I think old school RuneScape's quests, in some ways, might have become a little bit more like RuneScape 3 quests in that they're a little bit less obtuse nowadays. They're a little bit more like easy to follow, and they allow a lot more investment in their narrative and in just the moment to moment engagement in them. Something I always love about RuneScape quests is that they're not afraid to kill your character. Like, there are hard boss fights in quests. There's a Treasure 2 shout out. Is and that just gets you interested in what's happening. Even if you're spacebarring everything, if a boss like kicks your ass, you're like, oh, okay. Like, you're kind of respecting that content a little bit more. I always say that, like, you're never going to give something to a game that's not demanding anything from you. And when a game demands something from you, you're a little bit more passionate about it. I always bring up Dark Souls as a great example of that. You get passionate when you have to overcome something, and when the game, and by giving the game the same respect it gives you as a player. And I think that certainly applies to the questing in RuneScape. Although, obviously there's the question of of Quest Helper and plugins and all this kind of stuff as well. I would certainly that's definitely kind of a half gap for me where I'm like, do I want to do the 200 quests or 150 quests in RuneScape 3 that I've already done in old school RuneScape with Quest Helper? I would kind of like something like that. But on the other hand, I don't like using Quest Helper for new quests in old school RuneScape. So it's a very I'm very mixed on that, but I'm sure it probably helps in the long run to have a system like that in the game just to make people that, you know, click click blue, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a game like RSC where we have so many quests. I mean, this is gonna like this is probably like a form of betrayal for me to even say this or question this. But I mean, you mentioned earlier in this talk, like you were talking about how many, like, it's the linear progression, but how many, requirements there are for different things and on all the unlocks. And a lot of them come from quests that are 15 and 20 years old. And you can really feel the age of the game when you get into a quest cutscene and it's the 4:3 aspect ratio and it's just the quests of that era do not hold up to modern day standards. They don't look well, they don't look good, they don't play well. They're very kind of convoluted in a lot of ways too. It's designed for a different era of player. And I think part of the reason why it's hard to sell someone on, RuneScape 3 now is you make an account and your first step is, all right, I need you to blitz 175 quests without Quest Helper, and most of them are outdated and don't play well. And I would be open to the idea of cleaning up some quests or potentially, and this is the blasphemous part, like if there isn't resource for cleaning up these quests in situations where the story still works, like I wouldn't be against getting rid of a quest the same way you get rid of a mini game that nobody's touched in 15 years.
Mhm.
And that's
Or at
sort
least
of one of my hot takes because we have so many quests. And for context, we have a lot more quests than old school as well. I think we have double the quests of old school and no quest helper.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Especially for these older ones. I think in some ways these older ones have aged better in old school because the aesthetic is so like it's paired. You see the 4x3 cutscene from Dragon Slayer 1 and you're like that's so charming. I love that. But in RuneScape 3 you might be like oof, yikes. Because the whole game has already has evolved past that aesthetic already. So getting brought back to that feels more of like a dissonance rather than like a trip down memory lane, right? I think that's I would say that's the benefit of having old school RuneScape still inhabit the old school art style, while RuneScape 3 has moved past that. And that has obviously led to, and I talked to a old school mod, the concept artist Mod Grub on this podcast a couple months back. But he also worked on RuneScape 3 at one point, so he was giving really interesting insights on both of these games. And something we talked about was evolving the art style of RuneScape 3 and how it's evolved over time. And the recent stuff in RuneScape 3, I think, looks great. It's just how patchwork the game can feel because it's evolved so many times over the eras. And fixing all these old quests is not only a ton of dev work for arguably very little return, and whether it's removing quests or not, at least decoupling them from certain quest lines might be beneficial, just to like not force people down those paths that kind of create that dissonance.
For sure. And I don't know, this is probably bad to say, but the patchwork description is very apt. I think as an RS3 player that's been playing the whole time, I can actually tell based on quests that I play through, I could attribute them to different ownership eras. Like between every Jagex acquisition, someone else would be brought in and would make a huge change to the way things were done. And it could be like there's an era where all the quests are voiced. There's an era
Yeah.
where none of the quests have cutscenes and instead they have like image, like I call them like PowerPoints. There's and when you play through them, none of them fit well together at all. You do the first three quests of the series, and it'd be like an old school quest. Quest 4 and 5 would be voice acted and would have musical interludes and have like comedy breaks. Then the quest after that would have no voice acting, but it would have voiced PowerPoints. And then the quest after that would be like back to the original, which is kind of where we're back to with like cutscenes and original music and bosses. And it's like it doesn't feel cohesive at all. And it feels like you're playing 8 different eras of a game all at once. And in a cohesive storyline, it doesn't fit at all. And I think it's part of the reason why I think recently RS3 had an update cleaning up Lumbridge.
Mm.
And it's sort of the same thing where over the years, stuff just kind of gets plunked on the overworld in random spots. And you have mini games that don't need to exist anymore and all this stuff. And it's kind of across the whole world now where like there are so many areas that just look and feel terrible. One of the classic ones is the World Wakes quest. which is like one of the more iconic RuneScape 3 quests. It's the Guthix 1, spoiler alert. Um, what ended up happening is it used to be at a different location, and then it just randomly got plunked next to Artie. And for about a decade, the ground wasn't even blended. So it literally was just like ground from another area just kind of plunked in a big square.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just the game just needs a cleanup, like a serious total game cleanup. It's quests, it's overworld, it's skills, it's everything.
And I wanna shout out too that like there are developers that are tasked with doing that, like at least graphical updates, and they look great, right? I think that the one that really kind of took me by surprise was the Lighthouse region, and Relica in general looks really wonderful in RuneScape 3 after the update to it. The Lighthouse especially looks fucking sick. It looks really really cool, and when things are really fit together cohesively there. The archaeology dig sites are another area that I love. The game looks wonderful. It really does. And it does have its own like vibe going. And it still kind of feels like RuneScape. And it's just everything there fits. I think when I spoke to that to Mod Grub about it, something I pointed out when I was looking at RuneScape 3 versus old school RuneScape's aesthetic, right? Today's old school RuneScape aesthetic has also changed a little bit, not as drastically, but a little bit. And an aesthetic that they really have doubled down on is this kind of like clay look to it. Like if you zoom out on old school RuneScape, it looks like little clay miniatures. And I love that. It looks so cool. It's so unique. It's so bespoke, as much as I love that word, to old school RuneScape as a game. It's so identifiable. And RuneScape 3's aesthetic, the most recent incarnation of it, is also reminds me of a more detailed, a more polished version of that, where you have these like it looks like a clay miniature when you zoom out on it. And I really enjoy that, and I hope to see more of that old world being updated because Lumbridge can be updated to that aesthetic, right? The RS3 version of Lumbridge doesn't inhabit the same like nostalgia, at least in my opinion, that the OSRS Lumbridge does. So you can keep what it has today, but bring it up to the art style of like the Lighthouse from Relica, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the patchwork component of it. Like if you and I think they've done a really good job over the most recent years. It's like they've made it through probably a third of the game now,
Mhm.
where Relic is done, Fremennik Province is done, Lunar Isle just got
Yeah, I
completely
saw
redone and it
that.
looks
That was sick.
absolutely sick.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just as long as there are old areas and old quest cutscenes and old like it doesn't feel cohesive into the world.
Definitely. And as you pointed out, it has been improving over time, and it's always like the stuff that I'm most excited about. Like when I see new images of, like, you bring up Lunar Island, I was looking at images, I'm like, oh, that looks so cool. Like I can't wait to inhabit a world where the whole world has this kind of vibe to it because it is really cool, and really great looking. And I recommend even the old school players check it out because it looks really cool. So the reason I bring that up though is interesting because that's kind of the whole that's where I'm at right now. My group Ironman partner and I, that's how we play old school RuneScape as group Ironman partners. We're looking forward to checking out RuneScape 3 in whole. Now that there are changes coming, we're kind of like, okay, well, we want to wait till most of these changes are in so we get the best experience possible. Kind of like what we always say about old school RuneScape. We're so grateful for the time we came into old school RuneScape when so much new early and mid game content was being added, the entirety of Varlamore, the new mid game and early game bosses. We picked the best time ever to start playing the game. And old school RuneScape essentially doubling in size over the past year in its player count is proof of that success, right? And what we're hoping for is that now by giving some time to cook for RuneScape 3, it has that same like, okay, well, we're gonna change the early and mid game, make it a little bit better. And that I don't know. I don't know much about it at all, but I know the new continent that they're working on, I'm forgetting its name now, is going to maybe also touch on this. I don't know if you are know if the content is going to be more end game or mid game in that continent, or if it's both.
Yeah. So where I'm at with it, they actually haven't shared a ton with us, but it's called Haven Height.
Hmm.
And to my understanding, there is some like end game stuff that's coming out with Haven Height. Like I think 110 or 120 Hunter might be part of it. I can't remember. But fundamentally, my understanding is it's going to be a lot of early mid game, like level 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 kind of stuff for a lot of different skills and a lot of different activities. And maybe that's just me like hoping, but that's sort of the vibe I'm getting is ideally, I think it's a place that you could go as a, early game player getting into the mid game that is usually really overwhelming, and you can play through a lot of your mid game in that specific region and area if you wanted to. So
Mm,
that's my hope, kind of mixed in with what I'm expecting it to be like. But yeah, no, I haven't personally seen a lot, but I think it could be a perfect update for this year that they're looking at, fixing all these core systems and cleaning things up. And, you know, we're talking about moving off of this linear progression path. It might be a really, really good kind of second channel.
exactly. I think that as we talked about too, like removing MTX is one thing, removing dailies is one thing, but that's not marketing as much. I mean, you can market the removal of MTX, but that's not necessarily like a point of marketing. That's just kind of a long-term benefit for the game. The marketing really comes in with a new skill, with a new continent, and I really feel like it would be a missed opportunity to aim the new continent at a point of the game that's already has a lot of stuff to it. I really feel like if you're creating a new continent, if you're trying to bring in new players for that, you need to launch that with an entry point for new players, and that can be done a lot of different ways, right? Varlamore released over the course of 3 parts in old school RuneScape, and every part released a endgame progression, a new skilling activities, a bunch of new skilling activities, and I'm pretty sure every single new part also released with an early to mid game boss as well, sometimes multiple, and new quests and all that kind of stuff. And that really, 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 really helped on making Volamore not only feel like a part of old school RuneScape, but also make it feel like it's approachable and attainable for new players. It's like, oh, I want to play this game that maybe I played like 10 years ago or never played before, but this kind of looks cool. I like the aesthetic, I like what it has to offer, and I don't want to have to spend 1,500 hours getting to it. I kind of want to see it like within the first like 10 to 50, right? And that's what I really hope RS3 goes in for the marketing of this new continent.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think there's a good side discussion too about like giving people an entry point. And I know this I've always found is like a crazy argument, but I know sometimes with old school players talking about like, oh, they should wipe the servers for RS3
Mhm.
because it's very easy to say that about a game that you don't play,
Yeah.
obviously. Like I would say the same thing about old school. I'd probably have a better old school experience if the servers got wiped, but that's still the worst experience or the worst idea in human history. But all that said, I think the reason why that's being kind of said and brought up is because old school players would like there to be an entry point into RuneScape 3 and they'd be more interested in playing if that was the case. So to me, yeah, it's something that you need to look at not only from a marketing standpoint, but also like in general, are there opportunities to get a lot of players coming back at the same time and playing through the game together? Because similar to yourself, I want to make a new main account on RS3 once this like year of improvements is done because it's going to be so different from my existing main. I want to make a new Iron Man as well because so much of the game is going to change if we get rid of all the dailies. And I think it's going to be a much more rewarding, much more enjoyable kind of gameplay loop the entire time. And like I'm ready for that adventure. I'm kind of waiting right now. It's a bit of a holding pattern.
Yeah, I'm waiting patiently and excitedly, and I want to touch on that thing you brought up about server wipes. I'm not necessarily about a wipe, but I'm very mixed on the idea of fresh start worlds. That's something I've always seen be talked about with RuneScape 3 and as an entry point for players. I'm very, very mixed on it. On one hand, yeah, that would make me more excited to play. Objectively, that would make me more excited to play the game. Not just as an entry point, but as also a like meta a meta acknowledgement that the achievements of that world, of that new world, would not have been devalued over time through the past decade of microtransactions, of buyable XP and all this kind of stuff. It would imbue more value in achievements. And sometimes people say, well, your achievements are your own. I'm very much on the opposite side there, where I feel like if you inhabit an MMO, if you live in a world of thousands, hundreds of thousands of players, millions of players, it can't be that, right? Like, just like in the real world, unfortunately for some people, fortunately for others, you are defined by how you're perceived, and your achievements are also defined by other people too. That's why people pursue some of the hardest stuff, not just as a personal point of gratification, although that's important, but also for recognition, for clout, to flex. You get the cool aura from a mascot, not to look at yourself in the mirror, but to also stand around the Grand Exchange or Wars Retreat and go, look at me, I did that. And I think a lot of that skilling side of things for RuneScape 3. For PVM, it certainly still exists, but for the skilling side of things, it's been lost over the course of however many years. And the Fresh Start world might bring something like that back. So it would certainly be more appealing to me. But it would also, as you pointed out, fracture a game that doesn't necessarily need to be fractured, and also act as a kind of wipe for people that have already invested so much time into the game too. And that's a really hard sell, and it's not necessarily one that's maybe even healthy for the game's long-term future.
To me, that's the Hail Mary play. If in 2 years the
Yeah.
player base is still dipping, there's no MTX revenue, and also, like, everything else, like, that's the last ditch thing you do, is you fracture the game and you split the servers, and, like, there are benefits to it, absolutely, but I think functionally what you'd be doing is you'd be kind of, in a way, giving the middle finger to the people that supported the game through its darkest ages, and to me, I think you lose a lot of people that way. If it's like, oh yeah, that thing that you spent 10 years doing, yeah, now everybody's doing it, but over here. So you're gonna have to restart. But I would be open to the idea of, like, speaking of giving people entry points, like, I just remember, like, I've said this before, like, it left such an impact on me. Day one of RS3 leagues and seeing 500 people running around Lumbridge all at the same time. Like, I want to be able to give players that experience again with RuneScape 3. And I'm wondering about the idea of a fresh start world that actually merges after a
Mm.
period of time. So you're giving people like maybe 1 or 2 entry points throughout the year where it's like, hey, if you start here, you're going to be on your own server for 3 months with everybody else. You'll be leveling up and playing the game together. You'll be racing to world's firsts, doing all of that. And then after that, it merges with the main game. And I'm wondering if that might be a good middle ground to give people an entry point without also fracturing your game long term.
Yeah, I think that that could definitely be a reasonable in between, and I feel like that would at least incentivize some OSRS players to check it out, if only for a couple months, and then go from there. As long as that early and mid game is made a bit better, and that's something I now like kind of want to dive a bit into. So, like the early and mid game, as we mentioned, has some issues with RS3, and there's a lot of different paths to improve that, from removing the MTX to removing a lot of the dailies. But there's also just this idea that I have, and it's this idea that both games, both versions are opposite sides of the same coin, and RuneScape 3 really excels in the end game. And OSRS has really great fights in the game in the PVM region as well. And finding a way to kind of push these things down and make early game or mid game players be able to kind of like peek into that, like peek behind the curtain and go, wow, there is something really deep here. Like, I know for a fact my first few times doing Scurious, that kind of opened my mind to what old school RuneScape combat can be. It's a relatively simple fight, but just the idea that before this it was just safe spotting quest creatures, that was really eye-opening for me. And I want more of that to happen with RS3 too. And not to go too long, but my experience in leagues with RS3 was very interesting, because while there were elements that I enjoyed about like getting the points and all that, I was really excited to get deeper into the combat. That's always been the thing that people talk about, both positively and negatively. And I've been really excited to explore that in my own playthrough. And I always felt like I was being kind of like baited with it. I'm like, how long do I have to go until I'm seeing the thing that people see? And there was a time around where I started doing God Wars Dungeon 2 and Elder God Wars Dungeon where I really started to see the future there. And I delved really deep into it as a result of that. And now I'm thinking, well, how do we bring that way earlier, like 50s and 60s and stuff? And I want to pitch something to you. But before I do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I'm actually surprised you got to experience any of it in leagues because the combat relics were so underpowered. And I really had so many issues with leagues. The only good thing about the league, in my opinion, was the fact that RS3 got a league,
Yeah.
basically. But there was so much wrong. I actually recorded an hour-long, absolutely scathing review of a lot of it, just picking apart a lot of the things that I didn't like about it. And what I'm doing is I couldn't get it out in time for like the actual leagues window, so I'm saving it for the eventual announcement of Leagues 2, hopefully.
I
And
was
I'm
like,
gonna put it
okay.
out right before as a, hey everybody working on Leagues 2, any chance we could keep this in mind
Yeah, very, yeah, no, it's a
before we
smart.
but but I mean leagues, even Like, yeah, I'm glad at least you got to experience a bit of endgame PVM. But yeah, I don't think it's a controversial opinion. Like, every boss in RuneScape could use the telegraphing system. You could literally backport it to all of the bosses, but you could also remake, like, to me, there's a good example here. Like, the giant mole is the worst boss in RuneScape 3. It is horrifically bad. There is nothing good about it. There's no flow to the fight. It's frustrating. It's random. You get stunned all the time. Like, it's just a bad boss. You don't want people experiencing it as their first PVM because it's nothing like the rest of the game. It's like 100 times more annoying. So it's like, why not turn Mole into a Scurious experience where you revamp it massively and you make it more like an endgame boss in terms of like the way that it plays, the way that it feels. But yeah, no, absolutely. Uncontroversially, RS3 needs more of that, and they need to move it way, way earlier in the progression. And that's what I'm hopeful for with Haven Height.
I'm also like something I kind of came up with where I come up with most of my ideas in long showers. Yeah, what I kind of really would love to see, and not to say this is the best idea ever, but what I would love to see is a revitalization project for God Wars Dungeon 1. It's not content I enjoy in old school RuneScape, and seeing it kind of exist in the same space in RS3, just given value by the invention, was a little bit like, oh, I was hoping that I would see a little bit more there. And it's also such a nostalgic piece of content, both to old school players and just RuneScape players in general. Like God Wars Dungeon 1 is like such a legendary content drop, right? With some of the most iconic items in the whole game, like the God Swords and all that. Just so iconic as a piece of content that I feel like a cool cross marketing opportunity there would be to revitalize it, give it a new coat of paint, make the bosses have actual mechanics that are properly telegraphed, simple, and maybe aimed at like level 60s to 80s, maybe lower the requirements just a little bit there from 70 to like 60s to 80s, give cool effects to the weapons, cool effects to the armor, kind of like give you that late game experience early on where you're getting items that have really cool effects. Because that's where the coolest part of RuneScape 3's itemization comes in, is when you get an item in the end game that has a totally transformative effect attached to it that changes your rotation, the way you approach a fight, the way you think about a fight, and your own abilities. That's my favorite stuff, and it's something that old school RuneScape severely lacks in the end game that RuneScape 3 does have in the end game, and figuring out a way to give that kind of like excitement from a drop that's not just like, okay, well, this is the same sword I just had, but now it does 100 more damage. It's like, now this sword has this really cool effect on one of my abilities, and on my Quake now has falling rocks attached to it. Like the crazy stuff like that to me is what gives a lot of the identity to item upgrades and item progression in RuneScape 3 in the end game. And I would love to see that more and packaged in a nostalgic kind of way, you know?
You know what's funny? I like the pitch, first off. It's already almost there because
Hmm.
you can take the God Swords from God Wars 1, and you may not know this, most people don't. You can actually use it on the altar of Saradomin in the Saradomin encampment, and it will make the healing and prayer restore passive.
Oh, I
So
had
you can
literally
actually,
no
so the
idea.
Sara Godsword is like, it used to be anyway, like a really, really well-known training weapon. It was like, yeah, if you want to like train it, it's like one of the only things that has lifesteal basically until you get to like the legendary weapon tier 100 kind of level. So yeah, like the idea is there, but it's not good enough or sought after enough or known enough to be good. But yeah, God Wars 1, right now it exists for endgame players to AFK and alts to ult farm. And
Yeah.
like I would love it if it felt like, oh my, like I got to God Wars. That's insane. Let's try to get this thing. Let's try to, like get a meaningful upgrade there. Cause right now it's just like it's tier 70, it's power gear. It's fine. Everybody knows that when you're like a lower level player in RS3, you want to use tank gear anyway because you don't have any life steal. So it's kind of yeah, I would absolutely love it if and something that I've brought up a lot, and this is probably a little too granular for this conversation, but maybe not. All of like RuneScape 3's like top gear, especially like in Magic, which is your favorite style, it all has crit buffs. Like you
Mhm.
get a critical strike chance. The only other way to get crit chance outside of gear is you just get 10% passively, just for existing. So it's not a leveling benefit, but no low level gear gives any crit chance. So to me, you could take all of God Wars 1's power gear that's tier 70, you could give all of it a crit buff for the 3 combat styles, and then all of a sudden, you've got a lifesteal sword, you've got armor that is uniquely good, and it will be the best power armor you have until tier 90 for a lot of cases. It'll give you something that you can't easily get, especially in the early game, or can't get at all. Like, there are lots of really easy ways to give God Wars Dungeon 1 a lick of paint. I think a side discussion to this though, and this is sort of an interesting observation. So we just got a new boss, the Fletch
Mhm.
Hatcher, Flesh Hatcher. I can't say that word. Um, Something really interesting about that is RS3 has a huge issue with AFKing. Revolution plus plus allows you to basically automate your ability rotation, and
Yep.
people like will AFK the absolute crap out of anything that's like a mid-level boss as an endgame player and drive the prices to zero, so a mid-level player can't make money. Not that they're doing it in a vindictive way, but that's what ends up happening. Because a mid-level player could kill Vindicta 20 times an hour. An endgame player AFKing it in best in slot can kill Vindicta 50 times an hour with zero input themselves. And it's one of the core issues with RuneScape. And something interesting about the new boss, you'll see where I'm going with this, is once you kill the boss, you get teleported to a loot room. You have to click on the loot chest, get your loot, bank it, and then when you leave the loot room, it puts you back outside the boss arena. So what they've done is they've actually made a low-level boss that is impossible to AFK. You have to kill it actively. And what that is going to do is it's going to protect the value of the uniques and actually leave it for players of the correct intended level. So you're actually going to be able to consistently make money there. The uniques in the comments aren't all going to go to zero because people are AFKing the log on their mains. So to me, that's a design I actually really like. And I would love to see that done to God Wars Dungeon 1, where it stops being something that people just AFK. I don't like exactly that, but I love mechanics that actually required you to actually move to progress the fight or be at your desk to progress the fight, purely because I think it'd be sick if God Wars Dungeon 1 was like the mid-level hub. Like that's where you go. That's your first good money maker. That's your first significant upgrade path. Like it'd be really good. But unfortunately, in the current state of the game, you can't really offer that or offer anything of value while it can still be AFK'd.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from. And funnily enough, old school RuneScape does have similar concerns. I know for a fact that a lot of developers think about this stuff when designing new mid game and early game encounters. And the main driving force there of big, super geared players, mains, AFKing that content or just blowing through it, with their full Torva, Scythe, and all that is the pet. So something that, for example, there was an update in Varlamore Part 1 called Perilous Moons. It's really cool. It's like Barrows 2.0. It's like Barrows if it wasn't old and janky. Really, really interesting content designed by Mod Rice. It's super fascinating. And what he consciously did in designing that content is not include a pet on the table. To not make it something that just end games go in and just obliterate just for the clog or for the collection log. And that's a very creative solution to that too, where it's like, and you could say, well, I want a pet. That's cool. And I agree, but that is another example of a potential solution to that. Another one being like the bosses, their mechanics deal percent health damage instead of flat damage, which forces a lot of end game players to need to do a good DPS rotation to either skip those mechanics or, actually do the encounter by avoiding them. Things like that, I feel like add a little bit more incentive for that. Although nothing is perfect, but that's some examples there.
Yeah, it's something that should be considered, I think, in design, and it's something that it's hard because if you do this really cool, like this is a mid-level spot, but we've made it really cool, the first thing that's going to happen is endgame players are going to flood there, and you're going to end up creating, something that doesn't actually work, right? If you if you tank the values of everything and it ends up just being another endgame AFK place. But yeah, functionally, I'd love it if God Wars got a lick of paint. I think it'd be really cool. My number one gripe with God Wars, this is such an aside, it's like not even funny, but Kriara in RuneScape 3 stands and walks on the ground, but you still can't melee it.
Oh, weird.
I think it's
That
bro doesn't even fly.
that's crazy. That's crazy. That's arguably game
Right?
breaking. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You can it makes absolutely no sense. Even with leagues in the +1 range, you couldn't even. It's like it's on the ground. What do you anyway? But that's less important. But yeah, I'm on board. I like the pitch.
Yeah, I feel like, the first real destination right now, correct me if I'm wrong, for players in the mid to late game, I would say more like mid-ish game, is God Wars Dungeon 2. And that was the first time I really experienced proper PVM in RuneScape 3. And it's a piece of content that released a long time ago, arguably. It's almost a decade now. And it's surprising how well it aged. I think a lot of the bosses there, not some of them notwithstanding. Maybe Grigorovic is a bit weird, but most of them have aged really, really, really well. Vindicta has aged well, especially Hellware. These are great fights with simple mechanics that are genuinely feel punishing for the time you actually get into them. And that was my first real kind of like experience with the game. I know I got my T7 relic on Mage, the book, and I went in and I started doing these encounters, and it was just this first like taste of like, oh, I'm prioritizing my rotation. I'm learning how to do it well. I'm not looking up guides with my rotation. I'm just kind of figuring it out by looking at my abilities and just getting faster KC and doing all this really fun stuff and doing the mechanic, learning how to do the shield swap, resonance switch and all this kind of stuff. Really exciting, really satisfying, and very simple. And I just wish it happened like 30 levels earlier.
Yeah, they're great learning bosses. God Wars 2 is solid. There's also like a side point, which is, and we don't need to get into it today, but necromancy
Yes.
has
Yes.
skipped a lot of the game in a way that is, I would say, relatively like validly concerning. Because you're right, God Wars 2 was the destination, but if you play necromancy, there is no destination. The entire skill exists in its own bubble, and you can play all the way to tier 95 legendary weapons really without exploring any of the world outside of like a singular kill.
Yeah, that's my big issue with necromancy for the bit I did in leagues. Well, the first issue was annoyingly just the fact that I was mage relic, but I would still have done more damage doing necromancy most of the time. It's until really late, like really late in my progression when I got like the tectonic and the fracture staff of armadillo and stuff. But like before that, it felt like I should have just been doing necromancy as a mage relicer. But that beyond that, it's how insular the skill feels. It feels like you're just doing it in the main city, and then you get like side missions where you have to go kill a boss once, or like 5 times. And I'm just like, I my dream for necromancy, if they were to add a fourth combat style, is that yeah, create the city, it's cool looking, but make sure it's fully interconnected with the game world. I don't want there to be bosses only in the necromancer zone. I want there to be 7 new bosses all around the area in different pockets of the area of the world. Now that prioritize some necromancy gear, but can be done with other styles that like, just connect it like you would the progression path that RuneScape is known for, which is just a whole bunch of detours that lead into more detours that lead into more detours. I need this ring that comes from this boss that needs this item to do this boss well, and now I have to go all the way back down that list and start checking them off with grinds. And that's what's so satisfying about building up your character, and it's something that I experienced in RuneScape 3, especially in the mid and end game. But necromancy feels so just disconnected from that entire thing, and now it seems like they're starting to fix that, but it's been like 3 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's what drove me away from my hardcore Iron Man. I loved progressing and going for full best in slot on it, but once I got best in slot necromancy, which is the easiest skill to best in slot, and if you're a main, it's the cheapest one too. Immediately, it's like, okay, I don't know what the point is of getting any of these other styles because they're all weaker than necromancy. They do less in terms of like QOL, AoE, passive healing. Like necromancy has it all, and it's the easiest to get. And at almost every level bracket, it outperforms every other level bracket of the other 3 styles. And because of that, like it's another one of those things where it feels like a shortcut that de-incentivizes playing the rest of the game.
Yeah.
And I'm not a conventional necromancy hater because I think it actually fixed a lot of issues with combat that like needed to be fixed because before necromancy, 80% of the player base just didn't engage in combat at all. And now all of those players do, and they all use necromancy, and that's great. But I I think they made a mistake in not cleaning up the other styles at the same time. Because now
Yeah.
finally heading into 2026, we're gonna have the quote like necromancification of the other 3 core styles, not in terms of their progression path, but in terms of making sure that they do comparable damage, making the base kits better, giving them interesting passives, giving them interesting, interactions where like whenever you have a RuneScape player that like plays necromancy, they've got builders and they've got spenders. It's very easy to understand. They switch to melee and it's like, okay, so what are the synergies? And you have to tell them, there aren't any.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm glad all of that is being fixed, but it took so long that so many players are just really, really disenchanted with the whole thing because it took way too long.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's something that I definitely echo. I think necromancy is From a just a combat design standpoint, it's very intuitive. It's interesting. It has like cool synergies, and the ways the abilities interact is really cool. It does feel very necromantic. I don't know if that's the correct word, where you're summoning a bunch of, the little minions, and they're seeing them attack, and they do a lot of damage. They're very impactful. They have unique abilities each. All that stuff I think is done really well. And I know that now they're, as you pointed out, they're necromancifying some of the other styles. I think all three is the plan. Right now they have ranged on the beta, and I haven't played it, but from what I've seen, it looks pretty cool seeing like the style kind of be brought in line with the level of synergies and intuitiveness that necromancy offered, without also sacrificing all the identity, just like chiseling out its own identity from the simplification.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and it's gonna be controversial because yeah, I'm sure old school players are the same. Big changes are never well received, no matter what they are, or if they're, quote unquote objectively good or bad. It doesn't matter. If it's different, it's gonna be met with a lot of skepticism. But yeah, foundationally, it's like each style is gonna have its own kind of carved identity. The ranged identity, it's gonna be like on hit effects, so you want to hit as many times as you can, and then you've got some like simple builders and spenders. You've got ability one that feeds into ability two, and you've got kind of a couple iterations of that. And then the main thing that it's doing is it's moving a lot of the power earlier on so that your core abilities are actually good. And the way they've done that is they've removed the idea of a threshold ability. So a threshold that requires 50% adren to cast, and then it costs 15% adren. I think it's really hard to balance combat when you either have ultimates that take 100%, basics that give you adren, or thresholds that cost 15, and that's it. So what they've done is they've just kind of, well, exactly like necromancy, they've gotten rid of thresholds, and they've basically just balanced abilities to have a cost. So they've upped the cost of adren on a lot of the ranged abilities, and then in return they do way more damage, and then they have no cooldown at all. So if you've got adren, you can cast your snapshot, and it's going to do a lot of damage. And I think it's going to go a long way in terms of like making it feel like, at least if you want to play as a ranger or a mage or a meleeer, you're not completely screwed because you're not using necromancy. But it still only kind of scratches the surface, because necromancy still has the crazy AoE, and it still has the passive healing and all this other stuff. And so far in the beta for ranged, none of that has been addressed. It's just the core power level. So good, but I feel like there might need to be a third kind of combat update to the core three styles after this one, and there already was one last year as well. So slowly but surely we'll get closer and closer to necromancy.
I'm hoping, because I really did end up, I had mixed feelings, but I really did end up falling in love with doing mage in leagues. I really did, and I love the combat style a ton, and it's really cool, and it was fun figuring out the rotation. There was some issues, obviously, with some abilities that I maybe either didn't feel like they were great, or just didn't have any active synergies, or didn't feel like they had a purpose. But I know melee is the worst of those, just because of the way it's been split into three separate or two separate skills. But beyond that, something I want to shout out about RuneScape 3's PVM progression is there's a lot of avenues for power creep. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm generally pro power creep if done well, but things like, shout out, and I mentioned this to, I believe it was Mod Sponge when I first spoke to him, where I'm like, one of my favorite things I did in RuneScape 3 is get the ability codexes, because they made otherwise kind of boring abilities into just like rotation defining ones that are incredibly exciting to use and really, really impactful to your moment to moment gameplay. And that's my favorite kind of upgrade, right? Like if you're expecting me to spend, and this is League, so way less time, but if you're expecting me to spend 100 hours farming a boss, you better bet your ass that the reward is worth it, or I'm going to be upset. And that's generally it still exists, but generally my criticism of a lot of OSRS endgame content is the fight is amazing. It's 150 hours for a one max hit increase that you're going to see once every like 3 days if you're doing PVM. So it's like there's this dissonance in my head where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do all of this, but I can also just not and still do whatever I want in the game because it's not that impactful. And there's some items that really are impactful, but the point is I'm trying to say is that RuneScape 3 has that like down lock, is creating these really impactful rewards. And I think that you have this baseline for synergies with these changes for combat, and now you can start augmenting them with unique rewards. Like I want to see like actual builds and multiple builds in the same style for RuneScape 3, kind of like what you would see in like an ARPG. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's actually like one of my pitches or ideas for auras is like people like the idea that they can bring an aura that gives them more adrenaline for on hits, or that they can get heal on hits, or like stuff like that, right? And that's the kind of thing that like if you wanted to, you could complete the vampire quest line, you could unlock a boon of like vampirism, and then you could actually at a bank attune your abilities to be vampiric, and then you would kind of be able to, actually customize your build to the content that you were playing. That's not fully, ARPG like, but you absolutely could develop builds, and I don't think it would be particularly hard to do. It's just making sure they're done in a way that is balanced and easy to do and easy to understand, and that's the biggest thing, right? RuneScape 3 has 2 times too much content. It is 5 times more confusing than it needs to be. So, if you're adding complexity back and adding new systems in, I think you also need to remove a lot at the same time, or you're kind of, creating, the same problems that you're in the process of trying to fix.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that like one of my favorite upgrades that I got in RuneScape 3 was a pair of gloves from a really end game Slayer creature, the Cinderbane gloves, and they added a passive poison damage on your character that can be expanded upon or made better through a poison potion, which in RuneScape 3 you drink them, which is a bit weird, but like regardless, you have a poison
You
potion that
don't
increases.
actually drink them, by the way. The right click is apply.
Oh, okay. Well, is it? Am I wrong in saying the animation is the drinking animation?
Oh, it absolutely
Okay,
is.
okay, okay. So I'm glad I'm not totally wrong there. And so, you have the poison potion, and you apply the poison potion, and then that synergizes with your the dot damage of your gloves, and it's a really noticeable, impactful thing. You can see it in your hit splats. And to me, the best kind of upgrades are not only those that are passive, but ones that are visible. If you have a passive increase to your damage, the best thing you can do is find a way to make it visible, whether making the effect look cool or just having more hit splats that are, colored differently and all that kind of stuff. That's what warrants the upgrade, gives you kind of this feeling of satisfaction saying, yeah, I got that. And now I see myself using that. The issue, on the other hand, though, with RuneScape 3 itemization, and tell me if I'm wrong here because I'm very inexperienced with this, is it feels like too much of your equipment is sectioned off or locked into being what it is. So you have set bonuses in RuneScape 3 that are very impactful and fun to use, but they're also like, if you're using a set, you're using the set. So you have gloves essentially, which sometimes can, you can change them depending on the encounter. So maybe a boss is immune to poison damage, so you use the Carapac gloves instead, as an example. Your necklace is locked to the singular Essence of Finality amulet, so you're just kind of left switching your rings sometimes. And I feel like I wish maybe there was a way to decouple this cool set bonuses in a way to actually make armor stand on its own as well. I don't know if you agree with me there, but like something I love about old school RuneScape is being kind of this patchwork of different armor pieces that you've earned while still and not losing the cool set bone. I don't know how you would do that, but like that's always my opinion. And I'm sorry for rambling here, but it's something that World of Warcraft ran into too, and they tried their best to figure it out. Where you have these set items from the World of Warcraft raid that you're never replacing them during that raid, right? Like you're just locked to having that. So it means that your upgrades are only in like 3 slots because you're just locked to that set bonus. I don't know if that's something that you feel is an issue or not.
Yeah, it kind of depends. I think it is at the ultra end game because all of the gear is dominated by 5-piece set effects. Range, you've got the Dracolich. You need the 5-piece Dracolich for the good set effect, and you're never going to deviate from that. And it's the same with Magic, where the Tumikins Resplendence gear, which looks absolutely sick, by the way. It's like
Yeah,
the coolest looking gear in the game. It's also like 7 bill, which isn't so good, but
holy.
um, yeah, it's sick, and the effect is incredibly powerful to the point that you would never want to deviate from it. And yeah, I definitely miss the patchwork. I like the idea that you could have mix and match between different sets. I think it works well in the early and the mid game and the early end game, but especially like as soon as you get to tier 95 and the legendary tier, every legendary tier has a set effect. So, and that's even for the weapons, there's a set effect. So they all have special attacks and passives. And because of that, you kind of need to basically green log those bosses and complete them in order to use the set or the gear at all. And I find it kind of unsatisfying. I'll give you the example of a mask kit. The drop rates are crazy. It is insane to get drops for this armor set. That's why it's 7 bill. And when you get your first 3 pieces as a mage player, you can't even use them yet. They're worse than what you had before until you get to the 4 and the 5 piece set effects. And I think that's really unsatisfying. Like, I would love to be able to feel the progression and actually swap to it 1 piece at a time, but all of the positive benefits come from having 4+ pieces.
Yeah, that's
Something else I
exactly
was
it.
gonna say, the thing that you brought up, they actually started fixing it with heists, which is a new active skilling thieving update
Mhm.
that came out. That's actually really sick. You basically break into a location and avoid guards, and you avoid fire, and then you can get upgrades. But the necromancy one, it's a crown that is an attachment to the necromancy crown, like the tier 95 one, and
Mhm.
it counts as 2 pieces of the set effect.
So
But
it
it
gives more
doesn't
malleability in what you wear if you have that item.
exactly. So what it does is it actually specifically is designed to free up Cinderbanes. Because all of a sudden, it doesn't increase the max count for the set effect. It's still 5, but you can now get to 6 out of 5 for the set effect. And as a result, you can now freely wear Cinderbane gloves
That's a
on a
really, yeah,
poisonable
it's a
target, and you're not losing
interesting.
out.
Yeah, it's a really interesting
Yeah.
solution there. I like that. I think that, and I want to touch on skills in a moment, but something that, like, for me, when I say ARPG, I always love, like, you receive one item and it has a really cool effect on it, and you receive another item with another really cool effect on it, and then that third item with another really cool effect on it, and then you're starting to kind of theory craft a way to make those 3 things synergize with one another. So obviously, no individual set effect needs, or sorry, no individual effect on an item should be as powerful as a full set effect that exists in RuneScape 3. But if each individual item had its own individual effect that is consciously designed around synergizing with certain builds, that kind of creates the cool patchworky of, like, okay, well, I don't have this item that I need, but I do have this item that might synergize here. Like, that creates that, like, cool itemization theory crafting without, like, locking those pieces together in a set. But simultaneously, that can also create the burden of needing to know, like, 100 different special effects on items. For a person like me who loves itemization, that's, like, the coolest thing ever. That's why I like ARPGs and, like, Path of Exile, Last Epoch, Diablo. But on the other hand, for a player that's just getting into it, it makes a much greater barrier to entry than just understanding I have all those 5 pieces and now I get a cool effect from that.
I think I know you spoke with Mod Sponge, who is an absolute legend, by the way. Did you bring up Cinderbane gloves with him?
I believe I did. I want to say I
He
did.
freaking hates them. He hates them like nothing else, and he like genuinely like burning passion hatred of Cinderbane gloves, which
Why?
is
I'm
which is
curious.
quite funny.
Why?
He hates the design because on anything poisonable, they're just super giga best in slot, and they're better than anything else. And then because of Cinderbane gloves being so overpowered, they started making tier 95s with these insane 5 piece set effects so that you couldn't bring the Cinderbane gloves.
Oh,
And
okay.
then people still would bring the Cinderbane gloves. So then they just made every new boss not poisonable. So like every
Yeah.
boss of the last ton of years is just you just can't poison it because of Cinderbane gloves. And he hates that they're type all as well. So they work for every style. Yeah, anyway, if you ever get Sponge on again, tell him that I asked you to ask him about Cinderbane gloves.
I'll message him and ask him to come on this podcast, and that'll be, like, the first question I ask him, so I
No,
can
you'll
hear
get
him.
like 20 minutes of good content guaranteed. But no, Sponge is awesome. I've worked very closely with him. Like he's fantastic. He's designed a lot of the rewards in RuneScape. Like he's kind of known as the like quote unquote rewards guy, where like if someone needs a reward for a piece of content, it's like literally message Sponge and let him cook. And he'll come back with something fun.
I think, like, a cool solution. Obviously, I agree in that, like, they're hybrid gloves, which means they're good for all the combat styles, which kind of makes them a bit too ubiquitous. But on the other hand, like, old school RuneScape runs into this issue too, where when you make too many niche items that are good for a specific style, the dominant style always ends up taking priority. So a great example of this is the boot upgrades that exist that existed as the best in slot in old school RuneScape for a long time from Cerberus, a old Slayer boss, where there were very minor upgrades. You could get, like, best in slot ranging boots, best in slot maging boots, and best in slot melee boots. But because most of the content in old school RuneScape is melee focused, that means that you're just kind of camping the melee boots because no one wants to do a 9-way switch damage for like the smallest up, DPS boost ever, from wearing the ranging or maging ones. Sometimes not even a boost. So what Jagex did was they created a new item called the Avernic Treads that dropped from the newest boss, which is called Doom of Makwahatl. So talking about confusing names. And that boss, funnily enough, is very inspired by Enrage bosses from RuneScape 3, although it's not quite an Enrage fight, I would say, much to the chagrin of some of the endgame OSRS players, I'd say too. But regardless, they added these boots that combine all of those other boots together. You need all of them, and you combine them into the existing ones to make the best in slot hybrid boot. So on one hand, this does do it's locked now. You are just wearing those boots essentially all the time. But on the other hand, it creates the benefit of not needing to do the lamest, most unsatisfying switches, or just feeling bad about camping a specific boot because you don't want to do the lamest switch ever. So you do get this like really weird niche area there where personally, what I'd love to see is poison builds. I'd love to see maybe not as much power in a single glove, but I'd love to see rings and necklaces and fucking chest pieces with unique effects that somehow synergize with poisons. And so when a boss is poisonable and you've earned all those poison items, you can create a unique combination of items that just makes you able to nuke that specific boss that's weak to poison. Make poison weak enemies. Like it really kind of create a reward space there rather than just kind of like going, this is too overpowered. I wish it didn't exist. And I'm sure I'm 100%, he's a better game developer than I will ever be. So I'm sure he's also considered this stuff. So it would be very interesting to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a side discussion here of weaknesses because that's one of the big pitfalls of RS3 is whatever style is currently the strongest is the best at every single boss in the game because you get 100% damage potential and 100% hit chance at every boss if you're playing correctly because there are so many ways to improve your hit chance. And the end result there too is RS3 now has 4 combat styles, and usually you only need one of them, and the other ones don't have value. And that's something that I look over at Old School, and I absolutely love that there are different bosses. Like there are bosses that like you, even if you've got best in slot melee, you don't want to melee this boss because you're not going to hit very much. You're not going to hit very accurately. Whereas RS3, like we just don't have a weakness system really at all. And it causes a lot of issues in progression specifically because, yeah, you pick one style, and as much as it's nice that you can do every boss with one style, it makes the rest of the game feel kind of pointless in terms of upgrades. It's like, okay, why would you ever divert off necromancy if every boss is weak to necromancy? But it's the same with magic, it's the same with range. Like you pick the style you want, and you never need to expand your horizons, try anything else. It's sort of, I mean, similar to what you said about wanting poison weak enemies. I would love that, but I'd also love it if enemies were weak to styles as well in a kind of conventional sense where you get more damage if you're using a style or you get some kind of benefit that makes one style really, really good at a certain boss. And I think you'd end up with a lot of really well-rounded gameplay that way.
Definitely,
This is kind of
100%.
a side, not even a side discussion. You mentioned it earlier, but like you like the meaningful upgrades in RS3, and I do as well. But the other side of the coin there is until you get a legendary tier 95 tier weapon, you basically can't do damage right now in the game.
Yeah,
Unless you're doing necromancy where you're like kind of okay because the legendaries are relatively weak comparatively. But part of the problem with that as well is if you get like whatever style you get your first tier 95, and usually people do either magic or necromancy first. Um, Even if you're fighting a boss that you should range that is weak to range and you're using tier 92 ranged instead of tier 95, you're going to do half the damage you would have done with magic. So it really kind of forces you onto this path of whatever legendary you get, congrats, you're going to be stuck on that tier and that exact weapon for a very, very long time as you build out the rest of your styles. And you're going to do all of it with that weapon because it's the best everywhere. So that's, as we're talking about what I'd like to see next year, I want weaknesses to matter. I think it'd be sick if I was tier 95 magic and tier 90 range, but at the boss that's weak to range, I'm still better off using my range gear, even if it's not as high tier, not as end game. I think that would make progression in the game feel a lot more meaningful and important. And I think especially in a game with necromancy, it's really hard to motivate oneself to bother getting upgrades when necromancy works and is good everywhere.
and is very easy to obtain. So yeah, for sure. And I completely agree with you. I think that like there is a balance between making a really impactful item versus a very powerful item. And I think that that's a very hard tightrope to walk. But to me, I think the most satisfying items aren't those that just increase your power, but just make you play the game differently. I think that, there's a great example of this in RuneScape 3 is, I did hard mode Nakatra. That was a very sick fight, by the way, really, really fun. And I did it with, obviously I was using magic, with the Hellware weapons and a full, what's that set called? I got it from farming the little guys on the, in the area where raids is. It's the armor that
The
increases your
Tuska
critical
gear. Yeah,
Tuska,
yeah.
yeah, the Tuska armor. And for the crit strike, I did hardware Nakatra. My first kill was like 10 minutes long. And then I was, killing it over and over again. And eventually I got the really impactful items, right? It was so impactful. It had a cool, unique effect on them and like the wand and the orb. And it was just
Yeah, they're
super
sick.
exciting. Yeah, it was super satisfying and made me play the game differently because of the new spec and the way it dealt its damage. It was just really, really fun. And what was really fun about it wasn't necessarily that now my kills were like 5 minutes or 6 minutes, but because, or maybe even faster, I don't really remember. But it's mainly because of how I was considering my rotation differently. The same applies to the Fracture Staff of Armadil, where that's probably the most impactful item in the entire game that I got. And the satisfying thing wasn't just using it because it was more powerful, but it was how I used it, how I prioritized different elements of my rotation when I was having the crit buff on it. That's what I love. And I'd like to see that in the early game where you can maybe create a more smooth power progression. As you pointed out, that's the issue with a lot of the legendary items in the game. They're too spiky in their power. You can smooth out power progression by giving really cool effects on older items or items that might lack it, like some of the tier 92 items. And while simultaneously just making them impactful to the rotation and creating really cool ways of utilizing items. I know you just sent me very green arrows in the DMs. These are called Bic arrows. Do you want to explain what these are?
Yeah, well, you were talking about Cinderbane gloves and how you wish there was like more poison
Hmm.
synergy. And what they do is they're on hit, they apply a stack that gives you basically extra poison damage, and you can stack up to 200 of them. So when
Mm,
you're on max stacks with your Cinderbane gloves on, those Cinderbane hit splats are hitting like 6Ks
exactly.
every time.
And
So
that's
yeah.
really cool. That's really, and now like that really creates some cool dynamics, right? Like you might be able to like pull some of the power away from the glove on its own, but with the arrows, it becomes even better, right? Like you can, and maybe because it takes a while to stack the arrows, you're only using them on fights where you can get full stacks of the arrows. A great example of this most recently was a new mechanic they added to old school RuneScape, which is like a burn damage mechanic, where certain items can leave a ticking burn on the enemy for quite a lot of damage, but since it ticks over the course of like 20 seconds, 20 ticks, which is I guess not 20 seconds, but you know what I mean. It only is worth using on fights where the creature's going to last for that amount of time. So that's like the really cool way to create builds and niches and use cases for different items.
Yeah, I really liked the Bic Arrow build because what you do is at a group boss, one person in the group would be a ranger. Their entire rotation was different because all of a sudden the abilities they used didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was how many times the abilities they were using hit. So you would
Yeah.
just spam your on hits. And then the way that poison works too is it benefits everybody on the team because the buff is applied to the boss. So what
Mm,
you'd do is you'd end up with the whole team just slamming 6Ks with poison like you'd see a hit spot every game tick basically. And it would take a couple minutes to stack up the 200, but once you had it, the boss would basically, just absolutely melt. It was a really, really fun meta. And I wanted to bring it up just because it's similar to what you've described. And obviously it was made by Mud Sponge because classic. Most things were. I believe it was anyway. But what happened is unfortunately, like this was a meta that like used to exist and it used to be a build that people would do and it isn't anymore because now just no end game bosses are weak to poison, and then they've also changed how poison worked specifically to curb the power level of this because it was insanely good at the places it worked, and now you just don't get nearly as many poison hit spots as you used to. So it's a good example of one like they absolutely could have kept it. I loved it. It changed the way that you played. and I'd love to see it make a return at some point. But yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't really work
That's
anymore.
really good to know. And okay, well, I know we're running up on our time limit here, but before you leave, before we let you go, I do have a question I always ask the everyone that I have on. If you were let's say you were the omnipotent game developer god for a moment, where with a snap of the fingers you could change something. Um oh, you can go over a little bit. Okay, that's totally
Yeah,
cool
if you
too.
need to. Yeah, yeah. Just to
But
let you know, I don't have like a hard stop, so no need to rush this one.
but I still want to ask this question because it's always fun to hear what people's most like the thing they are most passionate about. So if you were an omnipotent god of game development, where in a snap of the fingers you could change anything you want about the, let's say, RuneScape 3. This outside of like the stuff we already talked about, which is like treasure hunter dailies. We know they're working on that, so not necessarily that stuff, but like something like systemically within the game itself. Um, what would you add to the game? Not remove, but like add to the game. If there was one big thing you would do.
Oh man, that's a good question. What would I add to the game? I don't want to give you like a boring generic answer, which is like I'd like to. There's a lot of stuff I'd like to add from old school, to be honest with you.
Mm.
Um, do people usually give fun answers for this or serious
No, I
answers?
feel like I mean it depends on the person, of course, but generally I feel like people generally say something serious. Like I asked Mod Rice this, and he went into just like the way some bosses are designed, for example. So it's like it can be as serious, as niche, as specific as you want it to be. It's an open question.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's a it's a big question. If I
Yeah.
could like yeah, it's like if you do anything to RuneScape. It's interesting for me too because I think I've had the opportunity to do a lot of the things that I've wanted to do to kind of help move the game in the direction that I think is going to be good.
Mhm.
Um without any like master manipulator memes or anything, obviously nothing like that. But
Right. Right.
because in RS3 there's a meme that I'm like pulling all the strings at Jagex and I'm like the top dog,
Oh wow.
which is actually could not be further from the truth, by the way. I'm at the very, very bottom of the totem pole. Um, but yeah, I think my biggest thing is like I oh, this is such a generic, boring answer.
No,
But
it's fine.
I mean, we're talking
Fine.
about looking at the early game, we're talking about looking at the mid game. Like I would spend as much time and as much money as needed to get RuneScape plugin support and possibly like RuneLight
Yep. I mean that's a
because
very valid answer, honestly.
as much I know it's probably a boring answer. As much as there's discourse about, oh, RuneLight's too far, or this is too good, it's a cheap plan, whatever. I think the reality is old school would not have the success it has without the ability to customize your gameplay experience and give you the things that you want as a player. I think it's a great way for the community to create solutions to problems they have. Whereas in RS3, when we have a problem, sometimes we're waiting 3 years for the solution. When if we had client support, we could fix it in an hour.
Yeah.
And I just think it gives so much customization power to players. And I know people always make the argument like, oh, it's impossible to look at these streamers with their like 8 million different plugins going, and it's impossible to read. And what I always say to that is like, that's the streamer's problem. If the streamer is streaming and you can't follow them, they're probably not doing a good job as a streamer, and they should possibly get on that. But the ability to do that isn't inherently bad. I think the ability to customize it, it just so outweighs any possible negatives. Even things like grand exchange prices. In RS3, you have no idea what anything costs, and it's the most frustrating, annoying thing ever. The GE doesn't update fast enough, and literally mercher clans quite literally run the entire economy. There was an item. It was the pants of the magic robes that I was talking about earlier, the Tumican ones. They had a reported sale of 1.6 bill. And then the next day, the next sale that was reported on like the place everybody goes to get their prices, which is like quite literally just a merch clan, 3.6 bill.
Okay, so
They
way
added
off.
2 bill out of thin air just because they can do whatever they want to the price. It's terrible. It is the worst thing in history. Uh, it's so bad. So even stuff like that, that's all RuneLight enabled, like the grand exchange prices of things and knowing the last 10 sales or whatever it is on old school. That's RuneLight. Quest Helper is RuneLight. Tile markers, RuneLight. True Tile is RuneLight. Like to me, it enables so much that it's an absolute no brainer to enable and make it happen. That is what I would do.
Yeah, I think also like I mean, there's so much to say about RuneLight. I think that undeniably the success of old school RuneScape in some ways hinges on things that RuneLight opens up to, in not just the literal sense, but also in a more like not to be too pretentious, but like philosophical sense, where so and this is specifically applies to only old school here, but so much of what RuneLight does would have never, ever, ever, ever passed a poll. Not even today when polls are a bit more liberal than what they once were. Um, Never ever would have passed a poll. I mean, I always bring this up. It's a meme at this point, but moving your camera with the middle mouse button failed its first poll. It had to be repolled in the old school community so it could work. That's insane. So to imagine that RuneLight comes in and tracks every single aspect of the entire game for you, solves every single puzzle, every single issue, transforms every single quest. Like that is unhinged if you think about it, for the old school RuneScape space. And the fact the only reason the players in old school RuneScape are accepting of it is because it's player made. There is this, I don't know what it's called, the Ask Mod Rise. I don't know if there's an actual like a game developer term for this, but there's this fundamental difference between when players figure something out, even if it's game breaking, versus when the developers intentionally add something game breaking. When the developers do it intentionally, it's a crime against humanity. You know, they should be fired and, burnt at the stake. But when the players do it, it's awesome and they love it. And if the developers fix it, it's awful and they should be burned at the stake. There's this like really specific kind of like relationship between these two communities. And it's so fascinating to see that. And that's what I'm really grateful for RuneLight for. It has maybe unintentionally paved for a more trustworthy and liberal future for old school RuneScape's community to be accepting of some things, because so much of RuneLight has now started to be integrated into the Jagex main client too.
Yeah, I mean, I think a chunk of it too is just trust, right?
Yeah.
There's a fundamental difference between someone inside of a corporation, whether it's a mod or a dev that's super chill, that's super cool, coming up with a solution to something because they want the game to move in that direction versus the community coming up with it. I think it's easy for a player to feel either intimidated or like they're being manipulated if it comes from inside the confines of Jagex and within the structure. Whereas a lot of the time, and this is something that's come up a lot even back in the mod TheRSGuy days, but sometimes instead of solving stuff, you want to lead players to solve it themselves in the way that you would have, because they'll be more receptive to it if they come up with it. But you're actually directly, specifically leading them to it.
Yeah.
And that comes up a lot, and it's just I think it purely comes down to trust, and I think trust is important on the RS3 side too. Like there isn't a lot of trust. We've as players, we've been through a lot, and Jagex has eroded a lot of trust over the years with MTX surveys and treasure hunter and things just getting worse and worse and worse. And like I would be willing to bet 20% of our player base right now thinks that Treasure Hunter is being removed and it's going to be replaced within a year with Treasure Hunter 2. Because that's what happened when the Wheel of Fortune was removed. Everybody celebrated, and then a month later or 2 months later, whatever it was, we just got something that was the same but worse. And I think, yeah, that's one of the things. It's a really good point you made. Is RuneLight allows the players to solve their own problems without ever feeling like there's a grand scheme happening or a grand play, or like they're pieces of a puzzle, or they're being manipulated in some way. Which,
Yeah,
for what
exactly.
it's worth, like doesn't really happen. Like all of the devs on RS3, in my experience anyway, they care a ton. That's the one thing. Like you can say what you want about updates, you can complain about things. My experience, and this is like coming out of working at Jagex and all of the rest, and my relationship with them. One thing that is abundantly clear is when things go wrong, they don't go wrong due to people not caring and people not trying and people not aiming to make the game the best it can be. A lot of the time it's external factors. A lot of the time it's management stuff, as you can imagine, which happens a lot, where sometimes something just comes down from the pipeline and there's no option to not ship it. But the devs themselves are awesome. I would run through a wall for a lot of them. I'm a big proponent of like just let the devs cook, and I think the game will be a better place as a result of it. But all that to say, like I think a lot of players are on edge with the devs, and I think it's completely and utterly deserved because of the relationship that we've had with them over the last 10, 15, 20 plus years that has been, I would say, at very, very best tumultuous.
Oh, for sure. And I'm glad that I always say this recently after the RS3 experience I had. I'm very happy that there are positive movements there because the better the relationship between the developers and the community is, the more the community becomes receptive of the changes to the game that might initially feel unpopular but are better in the long term, whether it's the nerf to the blowpipe or whatever else Jagex is now updating unpolled, because sometimes in OSRS, there's these game health updates that are done unpolled, but they are objectively better for the game, right? Whether it's some rebalancing some drop tables or downright to just reworking certain bosses that have been problematic for a long time. So it's just that's it took a long time to reach to that point, but now we have, and it's led to a far better game. Because what I think sometimes people miss when it comes to the polling system is that players pick the update, but they don't make the update. It's still the developers who create it, conceptualize it, pitch it, design it. It's just the players who pick it, or sometimes don't pick anything if they're all bad, and that's really important. But you can only do that if you're a good developer, and thankfully, we're blessed to having really good developers. So that's a really good. I would definitely echo RuneLight as being like the supplement to developers, to limited time, to intense pipelines, to not being agile enough. RuneLight solves a lot of these issues. And I would love to see something like that with RuneScape 3. I have no idea how they would implement it, but I would love to see that.
Yep, on board. Completely agree.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to talk about it. I've been following RuneScape 3 for a minute now, and I'm very excited to see what comes down the pipeline. I know I'll be watching I don't know if it's a live stream or not, but like the big kind of reveal that it occurs in January. I think it's the 19th, right?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, like around the 19th, because I know a week later it's the old school RuneScape content reveal too. So very exciting week there in January. I hope everybody tunes in, even if you're just an old school RuneScape player. Tune in, show support, and also just like check it out, because I feel like the next year is make or break in some ways. And whether you're interested in the game or not, I think everybody should want a mutual success of both games that only makes a stronger IP, that only makes a stronger, larger, and more successful community. So thank you so much for joining me. It was an awesome conversation to talk about this game, and hopefully we'll have you on down the line again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on anytime. And yeah, appreciate you giving me the chance to have a chat about RS3. And for the people listening to the old school people, yeah, I appreciate you listening and being open to learn a little bit more about RS3, because there's been, a lot of animosity between the games over the years, and it just it's really nice to be able to, break down some of those barriers, come across enemy lines once in a while, and yeah, have a good chat.
It's like that meme from the Terminator where it's them like they're both jacked as fuck, and they're shaking their hands, or shaking hands with one another, or at least gripping each other's hands. I don't know if anyone knows what the fuck I'm referring to here, but it's that, and
I
that's
sure
what I
don't.
wanted to say. That okay, whatever. The point is that mutual understanding and good communication that solves the problem. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I'll yeah, we'll call it there.